Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Harry Potter and Bella raised by Minerva? Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story for granting us permission to use it in our YouTube video. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. The author's creation and the original story's link in the descriptions. Please do check that first. Now enjoy the video. Chapter 1. Hermione paced nervously up and down the corridor, occasionally glancing at the double doors at the far end of it. Madame Pomfrey had been at work for quite some time now. Was it possible that this was actually more serious than she thought? Mentally, she made a list of all the complications one could suffer from after a head trauma. Internal bleeding seemed like the least of her problems. She suddenly heard footsteps behind her. Hermione turned to look at the wooden door behind her. She was supposed to divert anyone who tried to get close to the hospital wing. As the footsteps became more pronounced, however, she discerned two walking patterns. There were two people coming, and judging by the clatter, one was in heels. Moments later, the door opened, revealing the smiling face of Andy Tonks. Hermione was just about to rush towards her when the woman behind her came through the door as well. Narcissa Malfoy had a way to make you feel inferior even if you hadn't punched her sister in the face merely a couple of hours ago. And if that was the case, well, Hermione held her gaze heroically, but those piercing blue eyes were something else. She looked away first, directing her attention towards Andy, who was saying something to her. Taking down Bella in seconds. You really are something, brightest witch of your age. This is the second time you have laid a hand on a family member of mine, Miss Granger. Should I be worried about Lucius next time? Narcissa said drily, leaving Hermione no choice but to look at her again. Oh, shut up, sissy. Both Draco and Bella had it coming. Andy grinned. Though if anyone's punching Lucius, I hope it's me. It was an accident, and stop looking at me like that. That's the least she deserves. Narcissa did turn away, and Hermione even thought she saw guilt shadow her face. She must have imagined it. Guilt surely wasn't a common emotion for this haughty woman. Is she going to be out of there soon? Minerva thinks she's faking to get out of repairing the statue she broke on the 7th floor, Andy said. She hated that thing. The story about accidentally hitting it with a spell is absolutely fake, Narcissa spoke. There was a fondness in her voice Hermione hadn't heard before. Listening them chat about Voldemort's right hand so casually made her think back to this morning when Bellatrix Lestrange was still dead and the world was finally a peaceful place. And then Headmistress McGonagall had called her into her office. Hermione, come in. She opened the door, surprised at the acknowledgement. Professor McGonagall, now headmistress, was sat at her desk munching on ginger newts. This was the most relaxed Hermione had ever seen her. She supposed this woman deserved her rest more than everyone else. Yet only 3 weeks after the Battle of Hogwarts, she had announced the renovation of the castle was about to begin, and everyone willing to help was welcome. That was how Hermione had found herself sitting at one long table in the Great Hall along with fellow 7th years, some members of the Order, and of course the teachers. She had been an active participant of the debate whether 7th years should come back to redo their last year of school when a tabby cat Patronus jumped stealthily on the bench between her and Ginny. She had excused herself after hearing the newly appointed headmistress wish to speak to her urgently. A biscuit? And perhaps a seat? Thank you. Hermione banished all negative thoughts about this impromptu meeting from her mind. It didn't have to be bad news. Professor McGonagall maybe only wanted to see how she was doing. The woman herself probably even needed to speak to someone. How are you doing, Professor? It seems peaceful days are ahead. McGonagall shrugged. I am really not the one who should be answering this question. Me neither. One would argue you are among the few who really deserve to rest after this ordeal. I realized early on what being Harry's friend would eventually entail. It was nothing unexpected, though. I am glad it's over. Hermione thought she noticed McGonagall's eyes glisten for just a second. The moment was gone, and the headmistress was speaking again, her voice gravelly, yet gentle. I am afraid there is one last trial for our wizarding community to overcome. One last trial for you in particular. Hermione felt herself slide to the edge of her seat. Her hands gripped the desk, knuckles turning white. More trials? After all this, fate had decided to test her again? She had been looking forward to throwing herself into repairing the castle to forget everything about the war. Miss Granger, Hermione, You need to breathe. She hadn't even noticed Professor McGonagall get up and come over to her. She felt a comforting hand on her shoulder. I didn't mean to frighten you, Hermione. In fact, I wanted to make this easier on you. Hermione tried to follow the breathing pattern Professor McGonagall set for her. When she'd calmed down somewhat, she lifted her eyes to meet her headmistress's. There was another spy in Voldemort's ranks besides Severus. Hermione gaped. Her brain promptly got to work. Another spy? Narcissa Malfoy? She had lied to Voldemort. She was the other masterful Occlumens besides Snape. She'd never gotten the Dark Mark, though. She wasn't in her circle. Unless she'd made Lucius. No way would he take that big of a risk. Spot on for everything, Granger. I see where you got your nickname from. That voice, it wasn't sing-song like before, but she would recognize it anywhere. Lestrange had been a great legilimens, of course, taking lessons from Voldemort himself. Apparently. I told you not to come in until I invited you, Bella. Hermione paid no attention to McGonagall's next words. Lestrange was probably anticipating a wand attack. Only, Hermione wasn't taking chances. She swiveled fast, and before either McGonagall or Lestrange had even registered her movement, Hermione's fist had made contact with the Death Eater's nose. Bella, there she is. Oh, that's a heavy bandage. Hermione really knocked you out, huh? Would you two shut up? Bellatrix frowned at them. Don't you have places to be? Why? We absolutely had to come check up on our dear sister after such a scary accident. Bellatrix glared at Andromeda. Removing the bandage Pomfrey had forcefully wrapped around her head. I'm fine, she huffed. She took it off, didn't she? Madame Pomfrey stepped out of the hospital wing. Forget it. Told you I'm not wearing it. Now where's Granger? Andromeda and Narcissa looked around. Hermione had been there just a moment ago, but was now nowhere to be seen. Chapter 2. Hermione gasped when she entered the library. What had once been her safe haven from everyone's taunts and annoying pranks now lay in ruins in front of her. Shelves fallen, books tumbled down to the ground, splintered wood everywhere. Madame Pance's desk was overturned, the usually neatly stacked documents on top of it lying on the floor, crumpled and torn. No wonder the librarian had refused to work on repairing the place. Hermione could only imagine what having your life's work destroyed like that felt. It was similar to what she was feeling now, she supposed. Most of her adult life she'd spent with Harry and Ron, and they'd made it their mission to save the wizarding world. Well, Harry had. She and Ron made sure he didn't die in the process. Although she didn't have the same motives Harry had, Hermione did fight against Voldemort and his supremacy ideals to earn herself as equal a place in this world as anyone. She was happy with the outcome. Of course, if Fred, Snape, Dumbledore, Lavender, and countless others had made it too, she would be happier. But the world was a better place now that Voldemort and his most devoted followers were either dead or imprisoned and awaiting trials. Except the person who could be labeled his right hand was walking free, probably out and about with her sisters in this very moment. The article had been released this morning, 2 days after Headmistress McGonagall had tried to break the news to her gently. Lestrange had taken away that too. Hermione's forearm stung as she recalled all the lies she'd read in Xenophilius Lovegood's exclusive interview with that monster. As you probably all know from the cover, this is Xenophilius Lovegood for the Quibbler. Unfortunately, we had to reschedule the issuing of the Blibbering Humdinger's research I have managed to conduct. Although their population seems dangerously low after the stress of all the magic flying around this past year, certain authorities seem to believe there is a more important story to tell. So here I am with Miss Black, it seems. A convicted murderer with evidence of torturing multiple victims for information, and a person with sworn allegiance to the recently deceased Dark Lord who must not be named. Bellatrix Black's record is far from clean. Yet in light of a new testimony by the headmistress of Hogwarts herself, Minerva McGonagall, lovely woman, though she did seem worryingly uninterested in the Nargle infestation in her office, that Miss Black has switched sides at some point during her stay in Azkaban after the First Wizarding War, and has since been loyal to the dangerous organization called the Order of the Phoenix. Miss Black, did you really switch sides, or were you simply not expecting he who must not be named to return? A bit pointless of a question, since the whole reason for my agreement with Dumbledore was because we knew Voldy would come back. Seems like sarcasm wasn't a part of the act. On to a more interesting question then, at least to some. Why did you turn sides? I didn't get what was promised to me by the Dark Lord. Dumbledore offered it too, so what did I have to lose? And what did Albus Dumbledore promise you? What kind of agreement could make a blood supremacist such as yourself work with the greatest defender of muggles and muggleborns to ever exist? That's between me and him. Although since he decided to bite the dust, I guess it's just for me to know. And to add a bit of color to your story and shock the world, blood and its purity means little to me. Is this to say you're not who we all think you are? I'm no angel. Don't mistake this for an act of heroism. I do what I have to do for my own reasons. If it would ease people's minds, however, I am not the monster you frighten your kids with before they go to sleep. Not anymore. Since the first fall of the Dark Lord, I've been loyal to the light, providing them with information at great personal risk. I'd do everything all over again if I had to. Seeing as Miss Black left our pleasantly set-out table with cups of infusion of Gertie root, it's upon me to wrap up this interview. It seems like Bellatrix Black is more than she looks like on the outside. The question is, what is she thinking on the inside? And the even more important question, can the surviving blibbering humdingers make it to their mating season in July? For more information on that, turn to page 5. Hermione had slipped out of her bed in the burrow early after another night of nightmares and had found a copy of the Quibbler lying on the kitchen table. The cover had sported a large cartoon of Lestrange smiling innocently, prompting Hermione to drop her mug. Lestrange was no longer gaunt and crazed in the face, nor was her body so skeletal. Yet Hermione still felt horror whenever she saw her, as if glimpsing Inferi. She was not supposed to be alive, but McGonagall and Kingsley, who was appointed temporary minister for magic, seemed to think she deserved to walk free and that the wizarding community had to accept her. Hermione desperately hoped more people would think like her and have Lestrange locked up in no time. She couldn't face everyone's pitiful looks, however, so she'd sneaked inside her and Ginny's room to grab her beaded bag and had run out past the wards to apparate. Hermione heard footsteps at the entrance and fired green sparks into the air to let the boys know where she was. It had been a matter of time before they found her. Over there! Mione! Watch the books, you morons. She'll kill you if you step on one. Hermione chuckled when she heard Ginny's voice. There you are. We were looking all over for you, Harry panted, placing his hands on her shoulders. Ron appeared next to him and clapped her back. You all right? We were certain you saw the article. Mr. Lovegood's done a good job at keeping it light at least, Ginny said. That's one way to put it, Ron added. I've fine. Just wanted to start early with the library. This is going to be days of work. Hermione shrugged their hands away and went back to the shelf that was slowly repairing itself. Lies, Harry calmly said behind her. She didn't need to say anything. All three of them were seeing right through her. You just knew, and the panic's past now, Ron stated. Since you two seem to know everything, Hermione replied without turning to look at them. Why didn't you tell us? Ron pressed. You really couldn't work that out? Hermione snapped. Was I supposed to tell you, hey, guess what McGonagall just told me? My torturer is alive. Yes, Harry, the one who killed Sirius. Yeah, Ronald, that's the one who nearly killed Ginny. Would have been a funny conversation. Oh, and McGonagall also wants to convince everyone Lestrange is sane. Good talk. We promised to be there for each other. No one said it was going to be easy. Hermione looked at Ron sadly. His eyes were full of tears. Behind him, Harry had wrapped an arm around Ginny's shoulders. I'm sorry, she mumbled. It's fine. It's not like what you said isn't true. Yeah, Lestrange a turncoat? More like we have to look into how she might have confused McGonagall. If she did, it was a smart move, Hermione said. People will believe McGonagall no matter what. Even for this. Well, we believe each other, right? Ron asked. Just us three against the world? Hermione raised her eyebrows. Has it ever been different? Harry smiled. Ginny elbowed him in the ribs. Hello. Did I slip on the invisibility cloak by accident? Sorry, Gin. Hermione grinned. That's 4. Don't make me hit you too. You think everyone who was at Hogwarts while you three were on the run would believe that? They tortured us here too. Looks like we might just have enough people to make sure she's put on trial, Ron said. Let's see how she deals with deceiving everyone face to face. I think it's time Dumbledore's army gathered again, Ginny grinned. Let's make sure the wizarding world knows Lestrange's heart is as dark as her name suggests, Hermione said with conviction. The rest of the day didn't seem so bad as the four of them worked together, cracking jokes from time to time or reminiscing their nice memories in the library. Hermione fondly recalled smacking Harry across the head with a piece of parchment when he insisted he was the chosen one during Romilda Vane's obvious advances at him. Chapter 3. Chapter Notes. Thank you to everyone who's reading the FIC. Enjoy! Over the next few days, news of Lestrange's interview spread through Britain like wildfire. Hermione took great pleasure in the heated arguments students got into with senior members of the Order. Neville had managed to surprise everyone by standing up to yell at Professor Lupin one day at lunch, storming out of the Great Hall after a string of un-Neville-like words spilled out of his mouth. She recalled this as she was walking through the corridors and entered the library with a smile, ready to start her work for the day. Only, someone was already inside, judging by all the books flying around and arranging themselves on a newly repaired shelf she hadn't worked on before. I was wondering who has been working here. I should have known. Hermione turned to glare at Narcissa, who was standing behind her. The older woman was standing upright, her hands on her hips, watching as her spell worked its own way around the ruins. Wandless magic, Hermione noted. Who knew a housewife such as Mrs. Malfoy would be proficient at that? What are you doing here? Hermione snapped. Same as you if I were to take a guess. Restoring one of my favorite places in this castle. Narcissa's eyes slid to her for just a second. You are not the only bookworm who surprises everyone with practical knowledge as well. Do all three of you have the habit of getting inside people's heads without permission? Hermione gritted out, cursing herself for not trying to master off-clemency with the advice Harry got from Snape in their 5th year. I'm not interested in the least to get into your head, Miss Granger. Your thoughts are rather loud. And you don't have to worry about Andromeda. She never had any desire to learn legilimency or clemency. Sounds to me like she's the most normal out of you three. The blonde didn't flinch at the jab. She was lucky enough not to have the need to survive the Dark Lord, or she was simply not stupid enough to get tangled with him in the first place and invite him into her home. Hermione strode off towards the far end of the library, beginning to work on a shelf of her own, not bothering to look at Narcissa again. The woman was as stoic as she had been when her sister was torturing an innocent girl on the floor of her drawing room. If Narcissa had read her thoughts, she had the decency to not show it. They continued working in silence for the rest of the morning. None of them seemed in the least inclined to leave the library for lunch. Hermione figured the other woman was avoiding the Great Hall because of the potential arguments that might break out if she was seen. Narcissa glanced in her direction as the thought crossed her mind, and Hermione vowed to learn clemency as soon as possible, especially if Lestrange was going to be walking around. Who was ready for lunch? Ginny's voice suddenly came from the doorway. Both women jerked sharply at the sound, and Ginny raised her hands. She was levitating 2 plates of turkey sandwiches and pumpkin juice. I didn't know you were working with someone, Mione. I only brought food for 2, Ginny said curtly. That's all right, Miss Weasley. Turkey sandwiches aren't a favorite of mine anyway. Narcissa let one last book fall into place smoothly and excused herself. Ginny threw her a dirty look as they passed one another. What's her deal? No idea. Hermione hurried to usher her friend outside. We can't eat there. That place has suffered enough. Merlin, Ginny laughed at her antics. So how's working with Narcissa Malfoy? Awful. The woman's a legilimens, and a good one it seems. She was reading my mind like an open book. Sounds like you need to think about how horrible she is. I can do that. Hermione bit into a sandwich savagely. Narcissa didn't show up after lunch, however, and Hermione was left alone with her thoughts for the rest of the day. Just as she was about to set off for dinner at the Weasleys, a knock on the door startled her. Well, you've been keeping busy. McGonagall looked at the nearly half-finished library. I had some help today, Hermione said. Who knew Narcissa Malfoy was a bookworm? Narcissa Black was the Transfiguration teacher recalled. She was one of my brightest students, much like you actually. That's the only thing we're similar in, I'm sure, Hermione replied. Narcissa is not what I came to speak to you for. McGonagall placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry about what happened with Bellatrix. I had been hoping to avoid stressing you too much. I think the same thing would have happened, no matter how you broke the news. I hope you were able to get over what happened, Hermione. If you talk to her, it might even help put your mind at ease. Once upon a time, Professor McGonagall had been a woman she truly admired. Now she was asking her to talk it out with her torturer. I think I'll go have some of Mrs. Weasley's delicious cooking to put my mind at ease. Good night, headmistress. As Hermione hurried out, McGonagall sighed. A figure appeared from behind one of the toppled shelves. She hates me. Most people do now. She's the only one I actually want to apologize to. And that long-bottom boy maybe, though it wouldn't be an honest apology. Minerva looked at Bellatrix, wondering how they had let things go so wrong. Later this evening, Hermione recalled everything that had happened during the day to Harry and Ron. The four of them with Ginny had excused themselves from dinner and come up to the boys' room. So we not only have a murderer walking free, it's a murderer who can read minds, Ron sighed. Let's be honest, was camping in the woods running away from Snakeface that bad? It was probably easier than this is going to be. At least no one thought Voldemort was innocent, Ginny said. Do you remember anything from your occlumency lessons with Snape, Harry? Hermione asked. We should make sure Lestrange and Narcissa can't find out what we're up to. Empty your mind, Potter. Harry drawled in a frighteningly accurate impression of their late potions professor. That's going to be easy for Ron, Ginny said, earning herself a glare from her brother. We should try that tonight, and I think Dash. Hermione was cut off mid-sentence by the door crashing open without warning. Hey folks, Tonks's face appeared in the doorway, smiling apologetically. Me and Remus will go, but Teddy wanted to say bye. Molly said you were probably holed up in here, scheming. The four of them ignored the last part, waving at the chubby little purple-haired boy. Teddy Lupin had inherited his mother's metamorphic abilities. Listen, I couldn't help but overhear Dash, Tonks began. Sure you couldn't, Ginny cut her off. It's not hard to figure out what you're planning. You want my aunt back behind bars, which is where she belongs, Hermione reminded her bitterly. Tonks looked between the four of them sadly. Listen, I'm not excusing all her actions, but to me it looks like she's tried to change as much as possible since she began working for the Order. Killing Sirius and torturing Hermione talks of a real change, Harry gritted out. Tonks bowed her head. I can't change a mind about her. I'm asking you to consider everyone had a role to play in this war. And someone had to be close to you-know-who. Wouldn't have been very successful if she had chased butterflies and unicorns, would she? Before this could turn into a full-blown argument, Remus Lupin's face appeared in the doorway behind Tonks. Hi there. Something happened downstairs, and I think you might all want to see. Hermione, Harry, Ron and Ginny looked at one another before following Remus and Tonks with an excited Teddy in her arms down the stairs. The kitchen was quiet when they all came down. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were huddled over George at the table. Fleur was whispering something with Percy at the counter, and Bill was providing everyone with glasses of fire whiskey. At the center of the table lay a copy of the Evening Prophet, its headline flashing over a picture of a familiar face. Tonks gasped. Seems you got what you wanted. Remus looked straight at Arthur and Molly. Hermione had never heard him sound so angry. Seems like Lestrange got what she deserves, Percy jumped in. Didn't we just win a war to prove that one person can't decide what everyone else deserves? Tonks asked. Only, it's not one person who thinks your aunt should be locked up, Ginny replied heatedly. Everyone's doing a lot of thinking without knowing the situation first, Remus turned to her. Oh, trust me, we know about the things Lestrange has done, Ron snapped. We were even present for some of them. Were you there when she saved lives during the Battle of Hogwarts? I was there while she was trying to kill my daughter, Remus, Molly said. Bill hurried to refill her glass. Why don't we all have a last drink and wrap up the evening, he suggested. We're leaving anyway. Tonks waved her wand to gather Teddy's things from all over the floor. I don't understand why you're even complaining, Harry burst out. She's getting a fair trial, and that's more than Sirius was ever given. Remember him? Lupin? Your best friend? Lestrange's cousin. I remember all three of my best friends. Thank you very much, Remus answered coolly. And we remember the Longbottoms, Dobby, Luna, Dean, and everyone else who was at the mercy of Lestrange at some point, Hermione said with conviction. Remus paused at the door. Tonks opened it herself and left. Have a good night, everyone, Remus said after another moment of silence. The pops from their apparition were heard in the silent kitchen. Everyone stared at them disappearing. Only Hermione's eyes were fixed on the Evening Prophet headline. Lestrange, Death Eater or Double Agent? The Wisengamot will decide next week. Chapter 4. Chapter notes. Slightly longer than the others. I had to split the trial into 2 chapters. Did I leave the interesting part for the next chapter? Enjoy. Order, please. Let us begin. Kingsley Shacklebolt's voice boomed inside the courtroom, and everyone settled down, although whispers could still be heard here and there. Every seat was taken today. There were even people standing up at the end of each row. What seemed like every last part of the wizarding community of Britain was packed inside courtroom 12, where the most controversial of the post-war trials was about to take place. Up until now, there had been 3 or 4. Hermione had only gone to Lucius Malfoy's, delighted to see Draco stand up and testify against his father. Lucius had been found guilty for offering Voldemort hospitality and aiding him in the war. He was facing 10 years in the newly renovated, but no less terrifying prison, Azkaban. The conditions would be improved, and the guards would be human now, but still, not a place one would be too eager to spend time in. After Lucius's trial, Hermione had tentatively approached Draco to congratulate him for finally freeing himself from the toxic environment he'd grown up in. To her surprise, he had accepted her company willingly, and they had even taken a short walk while discussing the renovations of Hogwarts. It baffled Hermione that she had only seen Draco as a spoiled, entitled brat until now, when he was obviously quite a smart young man. She met his eyes across the courtroom now. His face was blank, as if he had a mask on, but there was something in Draco's eyes as he briefly met hers. Hermione felt reassured as she focused back onto what Kingsley was saying. Trial for war crimes, specifically murders and acts of torture, committed by Bellatrix Black over the span of the past 3 decades. Hermione noted the change of name. The Death Eater had managed to rid herself of her late husband's name, it seemed. Bring in the accused. Hundreds of pairs of eyes snapped towards the door. It was opened by a young, muscular wizard, whose one arm was chained to Bellatrix's. The woman's other arm was chained to another wizard. The 2 of them escorted her to the chair in the center of the room. She was wearing flat boots today, which made her a head shorter than both her supervisors. However, that didn't stop her from strutting, in Hermione's opinion, over to the chair and sitting on it calmly, as if she was about to be offered a cup of tea. As soon as the wizards untied themselves from her, chains sprang from the chair's armrests, binding her to it. Hermione, delighted in imagining how tight and uncomfortable it had to be for Lestrange. Only, the woman didn't even blink as she was restricted. Interrogator, Kingsley Shacklebolt, temporary minister of magic. A number of people scoffed at that. Everyone knew Kingsley was going to be officially elected once the post-war trials were over. Witnesses for the defense. Hermione leaned forward in her seat. Minerva McGonagall, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, and Narcissa Black Malfoy. Said people stood up on the right side of Kingsley. The courtroom was restless again. Order! Kingsley's voice boomed, silence setting around. Witnesses of the committed crimes. Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter. Applause erupted from all around as the 2 young men stood up on Kingsley's left. Hermione squeezed Ron's hand. He smiled at her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The 3 of them had decided Harry was going to speak of the horrors at Malfoy Manor and try to convince everyone that Lestrange's place was behind bars. Order now. Let the trial begin. Kingsley read Lestrange's many charges. Hermione was carefully inspecting the woman's expression all the while. Lestrange was almost nonchalant, leaning back into the straight-back chair, as if she was lounging in an armchair at home. Hermione shuddered at the woman's apathy and squeezed her eyes as Kingsley neared the end of the list, mentioning Lestrange's torture of her. She didn't need to see the smile that would probably appear on the woman's face. Her scar burned at the thought. The accused may call their first witness. Lestrange didn't speak, but her black eyes moved to her left. Narcissa stood up without a word. You can join your sister, Mrs. Malfoy. Kingsley waved his wand, and another wooden chair appeared on Lestrange's left. Narcissa walked down the stairs and gracefully sat down. If Hermione didn't know any better, she would have thought Narcissa was waiting for a cup of tea. Mrs. Malfoy, how close are you to your sister? I dare say very close. Close enough for Miss Black to confide in. Bellatrix has never been the type to confide in anyone. Am I to understand you were never aware where she was going when she was out committing the crime she is on trial for? I didn't question her every time she left the house. Miss Black's atrocities in the First War weren't reason enough for you to try and talk to her? Narcissa's poker face gave nothing away. If I recall correctly, my sister was already on trial for these wrongdoings. And you think 14 years is enough to atone for everything she's done? Neville burst out angrily. Wait until it's your turn to speak, Mr. Longbottom, Kingsley said firmly. But Hermione saw the kind look he directed at Neville. How could Lestrange confuse such a kind-hearted man? What you say is true, Mrs. Malfoy. It is also true that she escaped her life sentence. Narcissa kept staring straight at Kingsley, waiting for him to continue. What about the Second War then? Were you aware Miss Black would continue to obey Voldemort's every command? The tension in the courtroom thickened when he was mentioned. Hermione focused on Bellatrix to see if her face would betray any of her thoughts. I suppose since he was the one who organized the breakout, Narcissa was saying. And were you aware she was supposedly working for the Order? No. Hermione's head snapped to Narcissa. The woman was still sitting as regally as before, her expression calm as she said it. She hadn't known. You said you were close, and you have been proclaiming that you've never been loyal to Voldemort's cause. Why wouldn't she share this with you? For the same reason Dumbledore and Minerva didn't say anything to anyone else of the Order, Lestrange spoke up. The less people know about it, the harder it would be for the secret to be uncovered. Refrain from speaking out of turn. Miss Black, Kingsley cut her off. Lestrange's eyes glinted, but she said nothing. So, he continued, turning back to Narcissa, you don't have any concrete proof to give us that Bellatrix actually was working against Voldemort ever since her escape from Azkaban? I can give you proof. She didn't believe in his ideals in the first place, Narcissa said. She only joined in because she knew this would redeem our family in his eyes after Andromeda left. It was a deal for him to leave Andromeda and me alone. For the first time ever, Hermione saw a real emotion in Lestrange's eyes, surprise. Those two were good at keeping secrets from one another, it seemed. None of them said anything else, however, and Kingsley gestured for Narcissa to return to her seat. Thank you for your testimony, Mrs. Malfoy. Kingsley shuffled the rolls of parchment in front of him. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks. I see here that you can only testify that Miss Black saved your lives? Yes, Minister Remus stood up. During the Battle of Hogwarts? Yes. We were fighting Dolohov, and I lost my wand. He was about to kill me, then go after Nymphadora probably when a curse hit him. We didn't see his body, but Bellatrix was standing where he'd been. Did she say anything to you? No. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Lupin. Before I allow for the last witness of the defense to speak, Miss Black, what happened with Annan Dolohov? Let's say you don't need to book a date for his trial, Minister. The woman responded. Did you kill him? I did what I had to do to save my niece and the father of her child. Do you deny killing Death Eaters in the battle? We were both fighting for the light. After all, Hermione's blood was boiling. Lestrange was blatantly disregarding taking another human's life. We have different definitions of fighting for the light, Kingsley gritted his teeth. The defense may call their last witness, Minerva McGonagall. A collective inhale robbed the courtroom of air as the headmistress of Hogwarts stood up. Hermione was still hoping McGonagall would say this had been a misunderstanding and that she didn't actually think Lestrange was innocent. I would like to ask for the minister's permission to use a pensieve. Very well, Kingsley nodded. McGonagall walked down the few steps to the center of the room where she waved her wand. A large, circular stone basin appeared in front of the two chairs that were facing the minister and those behind him. Hermione found Ron's hand again. Now I would like to request permission from Miss Black to show some of her memories as well as my own, so I can show our wizarding community that she does indeed deserve a second chance. McGonagall looked straight at Lestrange's eyes. Hermione watched the two of them, not sure whether she wanted to see what McGonagall was about to show. With resolve in her eyes, Lestrange gave a stiff nod. The headmistress sat down at the witness chair and tapped the stone basin with her wand. The substance inside, neither liquid nor gas, swirled into a whirlpool which rose up and hung in midair over the basin. McGonagall rummaged in her pocket, taking out a small vial containing a couple of memory strands. Pulling the cork, she poured them into the whirlpool. Chapter 5. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. A young woman with wild black hair ran towards the castle gates from the direction of Hogsmeade. The snow that fell from the sky didn't seem to bother her. She entered the grounds and didn't slow her approach to the double doors leading into the entrance hall. Up flights of stairs, through tapestries obviously hiding secret passages, she finally stopped in front of a plain wooden classroom door. Doubled over panting, she raised a fist and pounded on the door. The door opened shortly to reveal a stern-faced woman with her hair pulled up in a tight bun. "Miss Black, what are you doing here? The Hogsmeade visit has barely begun." "I'm sorry, Professor, but it's urgent." Bellatrix pushed past her and dropped into a chair in the first row. Professor McGonagall closed the door and tapped it with her wand, muttering an incantation under her breath. "What is it, Bellatrix?" "Andromeda has run away." "She did it?" "Yes. I knew all the talk of being there for the holidays for Narcissa was bollocks." Bellatrix stood up and began pacing around. "The Dark Lord knows it. He's furious. Why did she have to go with the mudblood?" "Miss Black, if you could please refrain from name-calling. He sees her as a blood traitor now. Our whole family. He wants to send his crones after her, and that Tonks boy." "How do you know all this?" Professor McGonagall asked. "My parents paid me a visit in Hogsmeade just now. Left me a souvenir, too, since I let Andromeda go home for the holidays without telling them." Even in black and white, it was evident the color drained from Minerva McGonagall's face. "Show me." Bellatrix unfastened her cloak, letting it fall to the ground. There were hand-shaped bruises around her neck, which were getting progressively darker by the minute. "Put that cloak back on, and come with me," Professor McGonagall gritted out. Present time, Professor McGonagall wordlessly emptied another glass vial into the whirlpool as the previous memory faded away. The members of the Wisegamot, and those who had come to witness the trial, were now looking at the headmaster's office in Hogwarts. 3 people were inside: a very frustrated Bellatrix Black, an equally annoyed Professor McGonagall, and a calm and even smiling Professor Albus Dumbledore. Outside was still snowing, and Bellatrix was still slightly out of breath. This memory had taken place shortly after the first one. "What do you mean, no?" Bellatrix asked, her voice trembling. "There really is no simpler way to say it, Miss Black. Don't toy with the girl. Albus!" Professor McGonagall snapped. She seemed livid now. "You know what you know who is capable of." Cygnus and Druella are firm believers of his cause. This is 3 innocent kids we are talking about. It seems Miss Black will have to keep her sisters safe. Isn't that what you always boast about in the corridors, Bellatrix? That you are so powerful that your sisters can do anything they want and never get detention. "Oh, Albus, this is such a stupid dash." "Please," Bellatrix whispered. She looked on the verge of tears now, her wide eyes already wet. "What are the reassurance you give us at the start of every year? Help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. If they really need it." Dumbledore smiled down at Bellatrix. "And you don't really need it, do you, Miss Black? You are a bright young woman. You will figure it out on your own. Fear not. When the time comes for you to really need help, we will give it to you." It was like a switch was flipped at that moment. Hermione noticed the change immediately. The tears in young Bellatrix's eyes dried, and her eyelids fell heavy, obscuring any emotion she might try to show. "You will be sorry, Dumbledore," the Bellatrix in the memory said, and suddenly Hermione heard the woman everyone knew as Bellatrix Lestrange. They were all witnessing the birth of a monster now. Hermione turned her eyes to Dumbledore as the memory began to fade away. The usual twinkle in his blue eyes was absent, leaving them cold and sharp like 2 small icicles. McGonagall poured in another memory before Hermione could comprehend what had happened. This time Bellatrix Lestrange appeared before everyone, as she was notoriously known. Her figure was no longer youthful and supple. Her hair was dirty and matted in places. Her eyes had sunk into her skull, and there were dark circles underneath. Lestrange was in Dumbledore's office once again. She smiled widely, revealing rotten teeth. "Are you having fun now, Dumbledore?" The headmaster was looking at her calmly. Next to him, Professor McGonagall was clearly trying not to cry. "I see you are finally in need of help, Bellatrix. And like I told you all these years ago, we will provide it for you." "Help? Help? You think I need your help, Dumbledore?" Lestrange cackled. "You need my help? Before more people end up like Fabian and Gideon, or like the Potters, like Dash." She closed her eyes. There were lines on her face already. "You have no idea what it was like. 14 years I've been thinking of one single thing. Your deeds are in the past now. We must focus on the present if we want Voldemort gone." "The past? In the past, are they?" And what of the Longbottom's son in the present? What of the boy? He goes to St. Mungo's every other holiday to watch them stare at a wall. Alice has regained the ability to walk, McGonagall said quietly. Oh, how great! So her son can watch her stumble around like a headless flobberworm. Bellatrix yelled. They're never getting better. You hear me, Dumbledore? Never. We might as well have let the Dementors have a go at them. Whenever you are ready to discuss our next steps, I will be here. Dumbledore sat down at his desk and took out a piece of parchment. He began reading, which rendered Bellatrix speechless for a moment. She then looked at McGonagall sadly. There's the man you've been following your whole life, Minerva, circling around the fact he's partially responsible for so many tragic fates. By all means, let's keep letting children fight the war we were too weak to stop. We can stop it now. We only need someone in Voldemort's inner circle. Someone he would never expect betrayal from. Bellatrix bore her eyes into Dumbledore's. McGonagall looked between the two of them anxiously. I will do it, Bellatrix said finally. Not because you deserve help, though, she spat at Dumbledore. Walking over to the door, she paused only to turn around to glance at Professor McGonagall sadly. I'm sorry, Professor. The memory faded, and McGonagall threw Bellatrix a quick look before pouring another memory into the whirlpool. Minerva leaned on a wall, breathing heavily. Harry had done it. Wherever they were, Lily and James could be proud. She had stepped away, letting everyone else enjoy the win. She would go back to comfort them when they discovered the losses. For now, however, she could try to found you first. Minerva raised her eyes and met those of Bellatrix Lestrange. Those black holes she had thrown her feelings into many years ago. How Minerva missed the light in those eyes. Bellatrix Black's eyes. It's over, Minerva spoke heavily. It finally is. You have done more than we could have asked of you. You should go hide. I will make sure the world knows where your loyalty lies. My loyalty has never been to your side, and you know it. That doesn't mean you didn't help. Help, Bellatrix scoffed. I nearly killed 3 girls just to show off in front of him. Before that, I barely got to Dolohov before he killed Dromeda's kid and her husband. And before that, I missed Rookwood blasting a wall on the upper floors. I'm pretty certain there were people there. We can't save everyone, but it's important we try. Minerva approached her slowly and put a hand on her shoulder. You did great, Bella. You don't know half the things I did. Bellatrix pushed her away and turned to go. Before you tell anyone else, make sure the Granger girl knows I'm alive. If you need to find me, send an owl in Black Manor. Minerva could only close a hand around air as Bellatrix disapparated. How did they let things go so wrong? The courtroom was silent as Minerva McGonagall banished the pensive away. This is all I had to show you, Minister. Thank you, Professor McGonagall. Hermione looked at Lestrange again. The woman was slightly slumped in the chair now, her eyes staring at nothing in particular. The face was still a far cry from the teenager they had seen in the first 2 memories, but the eyes. The woman suddenly looked right at her and Hermione realized she was staring in the eyes of Bellatrix Black. Kingsley cleared his throat, prompting her to look away. The defense is called all the witnesses now. If there is anything you would like to ask Miss Black, Mr. Potter, and Mr. Longbottom, now is your chance. Are you sorry for what you did? Neville stood up. Hermione was so proud of her friend and how much he had grown since he'd asked her to help him find his toad. I'm not sorry for what I've done. Bellatrix turned to him. I would do it again. What I regret is how my actions affected people. But this was a choice I made consciously. Neville sat down, and Hermione saw Harry whisper something to him. Kingsley spoke again. All the information we need was given to us. Now the Wisengamot needs to make a decision. It's clear the punishment for Miss Black's crimes is a life sentence. Those in favor of conviction, a number of hands were raised, no more than 2 dozen. Hermione didn't know how she felt about this. And those in favor of clearing the accused of all charges? Kingsley himself raised his hand, along with so many others. Cleared of all charges. The courtroom erupted in arguments left and right. Hermione saw Mrs. Weasley stand up and try to get down to where Bellatrix was still chained to the chair. Order! Kingsley's voice boomed, magically enhanced, bringing all the shouting to a halt. This trial is not over. While the motives behind Miss Black's actions were ultimately peaceful, the actions themselves are inexcusable. This is why I will allow myself to impose a form of punishment upon the accused. Everyone listened intently. Miss Black is to help with the renovations in Hogwarts Castle until they are complete. She is not to leave the castle until the sentence is carried out. I shall appoint a supervisor for her until the sentence is carried out to make sure she does not pose as a threat to the school and all those working there. No arguments were heard this time. I'm glad to see we have an understanding here. Miss Black, are you satisfied with your sentence? Very, the woman replied slowly. She was looking at Kingsley, as if trying to pinpoint his reasoning for such a light punishment. Very well then. As for your supervisor, I appoint Dash. I volunteer. Hermione dropped Ron's hand and stood up. She felt all eyes on her, but she met Kingsley's, who had turned to her taken aback. Miss Granger, are you sure? This is quite the responsibility. I am certain. Hermione nodded. Very well, Kingsley said after a moment. I appoint Hermione Granger as Miss Black's supervisor. Trial is over. As everyone got up to leave, Hermione met Black's eyes. She wasn't worried about legitimacy because she herself had no idea what had gotten into her. But she was sure to keep a very close eye on the woman and find out what her deal was. Chapter and notes. Did I mention we were bashing Dumbledore in this FIC thinking face? I hope you enjoy reading this as much as I do writing it. Chapter 6. Chapter notes. Finally, some one-on-one time for the couple to be hugging face, not to get you excited though. It's going to be a slow burn. Enjoy. Another 6 glasses of fire whiskey. Madame Rosmerta, please. You were trying to get us drunk, Malfoy. Ron grinned. I think we already are, especially Mione, Ginny slurred. I don't know what you're talking about. Hermione hid behind her empty glass. Volunteering to supervise Lestrange. You're crazy, Ginny coughed, and Harry clapped her back. She's right, you know. This is reckless. What if she attacks you? I'll have my wand this time. Besides, someone has to do something. Cat got urine, Neville's tongues? Hey, if what we saw in the pensive is true, at least she's sorry, Neville sighed. Pfft, didn't you hear her? She said she'd do it again. Madame Rosmerta dropped a tray of glasses full of steaming liquid on their table, and Draco started distributing them around. Can we not talk about my aunt tonight? Mother's making me try to mend bridges with her. I was surprised about Dumbledore to know about you all, Ron said thoughtfully. Who knew he was playing so dirty? Worst thing is he knew what Black would do. Otherwise, how would he know she'd be back to talk to him? Hermione added. You weren't wrong when you said Dumbledore was the worst thing in the school, Malfoy, Ron said. What? Ron clapped a hand over his mouth. Hermione giggled. Harry looked away. What have you three done? Draco asked, exasperated. Oh well, do you remember your weird encounter with Crabbe and Goyle in second year? Harry asked. No. When you saw Goyle with glasses, Harry clarified. Oh, that way. How do you know about that? Harry rubbed the back of his neck. Let's just say Crabbe and Goyle were taking a nap while we took a trip to the Slytherin common room with you, Ron laughed. That was you two? Draco stared between the two of them. I knew Goyle couldn't read. You didn't even suspect something was up, Harry scoffed. Bugger off, Potter. How did you even do it? Polyjuice potion, Ron boasted. No way, you two knuckleheads, dash. Draco's eyes met Hermione's. Oh, you're something else, Granger. Who'd you turn into? Millicent Bulstrode's cat. They all shared a hearty laugh at Hermione's expense, then continued telling each other stories from their time at school. You're not a total arse after all, Malfoy, Ginny said, clinking glasses with the Slytherin. He smiled. I almost feel bad about hitting you in third year, Hermione mock-pouted. The next round of laughter and drinks was on Draco. Hermione woke up with a severe headache the next morning, regretting every sip of fire whiskey she had taken last night. Their little group had drunkenly made it to Hogwarts last night, and apparently had stumbled into an empty classroom. She straightened up in the chair she had slept into and looked around. Harry and Ginny were sleeping soundly at the desks behind her. Ron was sprawled out on the ground in the last row. Draco was sitting on the ground with his head between his knees, and Neville was sleeping on the teacher's desk. Hermione was struck by a blurry memory of him shouting the uses of leaping toadstool at them. Merlin, hopefully no teachers had heard them last night. She checked the time on Harry's watch. Merlin, soggy underpants. Breakfast is almost over. Expelliarmus. Harry woke up with a start. Who's yelling? Ow! Everyone woke up from the dull thud that was a result of Neville falling from the desk. It's bright, Ron covered his eyes. It's noisy, Ginny groaned. I'm supposed to watch Black today, and I'm late. A jet of silver sparks made them all look at Draco. Finally. How did you survive a war when you can't even fight a hangover? He flicked his wand, and a small vial of some black liquid appeared in front of each of them. My aunt's hangover potion. Andromeda, he clarified at their suspicious looks. Your life must be really awesome lately. You got 2 aunts, a psycho one, and a cool one, Ron said. Yeah, life's a piece of cake. Drink up, you lot. It has immediate effect. They all listened to him. Hermione chugged the contents along with everyone else. For a moment, she felt no difference. Then what felt like all the muscles in her body spasmed at once. Her head felt like it was on fire. She was certain her eyes were on fire with the way they stung, and her throat dried up completely, causing her to cough and gasp for breath. The process lasted no more than 10 seconds, but she dropped to her knees as soon as it was over. Looking around to see whether she was only being dramatic, she saw everyone, even Draco, was as shaken as her. Was your aunt trying to make a poison Malfoy? Harry groaned. It's just how the potion works. It's all the effects of the hungover at once, so it's done with quickly. Hermione stood up on shaky legs and grabbed the desk for support. Now you tell us? If I'd done it earlier, you wouldn't have drunk it. Draco straightened up too. You better hurry up and make sure my other aunt doesn't blow something up instead of repairing it. Hermione glared at him, then exited the room, muttering underneath her breath. Stupid Malfoy, stupid broomsticks, stupid fire whiskey, and stupid delicious mead. As she rounded the corner, she walked into someone. I'll watch it dash. Hermione stared at the witch who had fallen down on the ground. She sobered up quickly as Black stared up at her too. She didn't offer a hand, and it didn't look like the other woman needed it. Standing up hurriedly, Black grinned. Just what I was looking for. I was sure the party was taking place somewhere around here last night. Hermione could only gape at the full set of pearly white teeth Black had bared. Dentists may not be a thing here, but magic seemed more than enough. As she thought of dentists, Hermione's mind wandered towards her parents, so she searched for something else to occupy her mind with. Not to sound vain, but you could have at least made yourself look presentable for work, Granger. And brushed your teeth. Hermione narrowed her eyes. She took out her wand and cast a few spells on herself. It was enough to make it through the day and to the Weasleys' wonderful bathroom. The privilege. Some of us had to get up early to do all this manually. What? You're only proficient at unforgivable curses? Hermione spat. Black had the decency to look ashamed. They put a restriction on my magic until the sentence is carried out. Even on glamour charms. I might make myself prettier and accidentally seduce someone. Hermione blushed furiously, trying to get her still hungover mind out of the gutter. Bellatrix shook her head, smirking, and began to walk away. Hey, where do you think you're going? Hermione hurried after her. To the library. I heard you're working on that. So, Narcissa had probably gossiped about what she'd seen in Hermione's head with her sister. Wonderful. Black had stopped and was facing her again. Are we going there or not? I can't read your mind, you know. Hermione pushed past the other woman harshly and paid her no mind as they climbed down flights of stairs to reach the library on the first floor. Well, let's get started, shall we? Time is precious. We could have gotten here in a flash if we'd used a passageway. But hey, you're the supervisor here. Hermione turned to Black with a death glare. Not that the woman seemed perturbed. Listen, I've started working on this section here. You just go as far away as possible and make sure you don't cause more damage than repairs. To her surprise, Black walked away without another word. Hermione was glad to be left alone. Getting to work immediately, she was soon able to let go of the stress of the past couple of weeks. So much so that she had to remind herself that her main source of stress was in the same room as her, alive, breathing, doing magic. 3 things Bellatrix Lestrange wasn't supposed to be doing. Bellatrix Lestrange ought to be lying in a coffin 2 meters under the ground now. And she was Hermione supposed. Whoever this woman was, it wasn't the deranged murderer everyone knew her as. That didn't mean she could be trusted, however. If she wanted to play the part of Bellatrix Black, Hermione would play along and make sure to win the game. As they worked in the 2 opposite ends of the library, Hermione found herself glancing over at the piles of fallen books and shelves to where Black could be heard banging things into place. Caution was the only thing stopping Hermione from storming over there and telling her to be more gentle with the books. Restrictions or not, she didn't like the idea of being on the receiving end of Black's wand. The hours passed by, and soon 3 pairs of feet ran inside the library. Hey, Mione, you in here? Time for lunch. You better show up now, or we'll have to redestroy the library. Hermione rolled her eyes and appeared from behind the bookshelf she was working on. Harry, Ron, and Ginny visibly relaxed. Not nice of you to disappear like that this morning, Ron whispered angrily. Where is that woman? Hermione pointed to where books were flying around at an alarming speed. She hasn't spoken to me since we arrived here, she whispered. Think she's plotting something? Ginny asked. Unless it is to pelt Hermione with books, I don't think we need to worry. Ron and Ginny turned to Harry. Kingsley was helping with the windows in the Great Hall after breakfast. He told me her magic is restricted. Smart of him, Ron grinned. If you see her being suspicious, just stun her, he turned to Hermione. Thank you for the advice, Ron, she said mockingly. If I see her being suspicious, I'll send her straight in front of the Wisingamot again. Right, that works too. Now lunch, anyone. Ron's right. And you did miss breakfast, Mione, Harry said. Yes, but I can't leave her for this long. Hermione glanced in Black's direction again. And who knows what might happen if she strides into the Great Hall with everyone inside. Well, if you're not coming down, we'll eat with you. The house elves can surely bring us some sandwiches up here, Ginny said. I'll give them a canute. She hurried to add upon seeing Hermione's expression. And rob Ron of the roast chicken legs? I don't think so, Hermione smiled. Go. This here is my personal trial to overcome. Harry stayed to look at her a moment longer than the others. Hermione knew what he was thinking. It's not like you and Voldemort, Harry, she whispered, hoping Black couldn't hear her. I'll be fine on my own. Send a Patronus if things go south. She smiled at him as he left. Her stomach rumbled goodbye. Hermione sighed. As responsible as she was, lunch was lunch. She peeked at Black's corner again. The witch was nowhere to be seen, but a broken bookshelf was piecing itself back together. Hermione exhaled slowly and crept out as quietly as possible. Outside the library, she conjured a bench and a table and took out a few ham sandwiches from her beaded bag. Hungry as she was, she quickly finished them along with a bottle of pumpkin juice. She was just about to banish the makeshift lunch setting when a thought struck her. Black was a person she was supervising after all, not an animal. Winky, she called out tentatively. The house elf appeared next to her with a pop. Hello, Miss Hermione Granger. How has Winky helped you? Can you bring some sandwiches here? And some water, please. Course. Winky is honored. The elf disappeared with a pop, then reappeared seconds later. Here you is, miss. Anything else? Hermione took the tray from Winky's small hands. That will be all. Winky, thank you very much. You has a good day, miss. Winky disappeared once again. Hermione set the tray on the table and wrote a few words on a piece of parchment. Then, she pointed her wand at the space behind the table and muttered a few incantations. She tried to walk past the table and was stopped by an invisible barrier. Good, she told herself. The young woman crept back inside the library and let the small note fly over to the far end while she hid behind a bookshelf. Hermione got to work at once, determined to keep out of sight of the door. Chapter 7. Chapter Notes. Sorry for the slow update this time, but Chapter 7's here. I'm making up the wait to you with a bit of physical contact between the lady's face with hand over mouth in joy. Hermione managed to establish a routine for her work with Black. They would meet up in front of the library every day after breakfast, then get to work immediately without saying a word to each other. Hermione didn't know where Bellatrix went when she wasn't working with her. The woman never showed up at breakfast and always disappeared into some corridor or another as they left the place for the evening every day. Hermione had the weird feeling Black was evaporating into thin air, even though she couldn't apparate both because of her magic being restricted and Hogwarts' own rules. Throughout the day, they worked in opposite sides of the library, though with the rhythm they both had, they were soon going to meet in the middle. At lunch, Hermione either ate sandwiches she had prepared at home or occasionally popped down to the Great Hall for lunch with her friends, so they didn't worry about her. Every time she left behind something for Black too, although the woman probably brought her own food. Still, every time she came back, the food was gone. The barrier she left a couple meters away from the table was never activated. If Black had any ulterior motives, they didn't include her running away. It took the two witches 2 weeks to restore the Hogwarts library to its former glory. When they did, Hermione sought out Madame Pants, who was helping in the classrooms that had taken hits during the battle. The old librarian was in tears when she saw her haven whole again. Oh, girls, you two are so very talented. This was the most emotion Hermione had ever seen the normally caustic woman show. She turned away when she felt her own eyes prickled with tears. It was curious to see that Black, who was standing next to her, had bowed her head at Madame Pants and light pink colored her normally pale cheeks. Simply making sure the future generations can remain bright, Black said. Anyone is welcome in my library, Madame Pants said, as long as they want to learn. Something passed between the two women. Hermione sensed there was history there. Madame Pants certainly was old enough to have been the librarian when Black was a student. Madame Pants was probably one of the few people who remembered Black before she went mental. Even so, the librarian was seldom nice to anyone. Hermione managed not to ask anything as they made their way up flights of stairs to where Hermione knew the room of requirement to be hiding on the 7th floor. Still not going to tell me where we're going? Black's voice came from behind her. Hermione kept walking determinedly. Doubt you know. I've been a student here too, you know. Yes, probably boasting along the corridors about how pure your blood is, Hermione thought, hoping Black was as proficient in legilimency as her sister claimed. Stay here. Hermione left her at the beginning of the corridor and walked over to where she knew she was supposed to look for the room of requirement. With the Fiendfire Crab had started, Hermione could only hope she could still open it and try to salvage whatever might have survived inside. She began pacing in front of the wall, trying not to think about Crab's body they were most likely to find inside. I need a place to hide something. I need a place to hide something. I need a place to hide something. She opened her eyes to a blank wall. No door. Black was looking at her curiously. Would you look at that? You and your little friends found the room of requirement. Of course she knew about the room. Hermione reminded herself. Voldemort himself had probably bragged about it to her. No, he didn't. I found it on my own when I was a student, the older woman huffed. Stay out of my head. Hermione drew out her wand. She had been waiting for a reason to do so. Black didn't look too bothered or angry now that Hermione looked at her. She was more exasperated than anything else. I'm not trying to get inside it. You think too loud. Think too loud. Yes. It's a magnet for anyone that's even remotely familiar with legilimency. Hermione stared at her, trying to figure out what she was trying to get out of this conversation. You don't have much of a reason to listen to me, but what you're doing makes you vulnerable. Have anyone know what you think, and they can use it against you, like you've done to so many others? Exactly. And these so many others aren't faring too well now, are they? Hermione rolled her eyes. Threats don't work on me anymore. Then take advice. Feel what you want to feel, but don't put it into thoughts. Hermione swallowed her retort this time. She just witnessed a crack in the woman's normally closed-off demeanor. Feeling the need to talk it out with someone, she turned to Black once again. Lunch is starting soon. I'll go down to the Great Hall for a bite. Meet here in an hour. You'll leave me alone without a barrier to hold me in place? Black mocked surprise. If you do something, it will only provide me the satisfaction of bringing you in. Hermione tried not to wonder about the fact that Black knew about the barriers. Huh. You really are something else, Granger. You seem full of surprises yourself, Black. Or are you simply a really good actress? Bon appetit, Granger, the woman said and sauntered off around the corner. When she relayed the situation to Harry and Draco at lunch, their opinions differed. She's trying to mess with your head, Mione. Harry placed a hand on her shoulder. Kingsley will put someone else in charge as soon as you say the word. I don't think it was meant to confuse you, Draco said tentatively. Harry threw him a dirty look, but Hermione swatted his head. How do you mean? She asked Draco. I think it was honest advice. She wanted to teach me to occlude my mind when she came back from Azkaban. She gave me the same advice. Emotions are emotions, thoughts are thoughts. Keep them separated, and you'll be safe enough. That doesn't mean she wants to help Hermione, Harry said harshly. I'm not defending her. Draco raised his hands in surrender. I'm just saying it is good advice you might want to use, Hermione. A clemency around my aunt is a must. Which one? Hermione asked lightly, diffusing the tension. Both, Draco groaned. Andromeda managed to find out I like Astoria. I'll never hear the end of it now. You like Astoria? Hermione squealed. Yes, and keep your voice down. Thank you very much. Draco hissed. Whoops, you like the Greengrass girl? Harry asked. She's nice, I guess. Draco's cheeks and ears were getting progressively pinker. Well, Why are you hiding on the upper floors? She's working in the Great Hall with us. Hermione slipped away to let them talk about girls. She didn't want them to get wrapped up in any conversations about relationships since she and Ron hadn't talked about where they stood now, after their kiss during the battle. He was being his usual sweet, tactless self, acting more like her friend than anything else. He was probably giving her space. She promised herself she would gather the courage to tell him she wasn't really interested in him romantically. As she rounded the corner in the corridor for the room of requirement, she saw Black was already there, touching the wall where the door usually appeared. "What are you doing?" Hermione asked suspiciously. "Working." Something's not right with the room. Hermione tried not to pay attention to the note of genuine concern in Black's voice. "You don't say." Hermione pushed her away from the wall so she could have room to pace. She had figured out what she should be searching for. "I need to see what was ruined so I can mend it." "What do you mean?" "It was damaged in the war. I need to see what was ruined so I can mend it." "Damaged? Damage how?" Black pressed. "I need to see what was ruined so I can mend it." "Fiend fire. Fiend Granger, don't summon the room." Too late, Hermione thought, having said it 3 times in her head already. She opened her eyes to see a door beginning to form. She looked over at the other woman smugly. "I don't see what dash." The fully formed door in front of her was beginning to rattle now. "Out of the way!" Hermione heard a loud bang and felt herself thrown down to the ground. There were a few seconds of silence. She felt something heavy on top of her. She opened her eyes to see a mass of dark curls all around her. Looking past it, she saw a hole where the door had been moments earlier. On the opposite wall, splinters of wood had embedded themselves into the stone from the force of the explosion. The stone wall itself was cracked. Hermione realized that had she been caught in the middle, she would have— "Sorry about that," Black said hastily, standing up from where she'd been lying half on top of Hermione. "Need a hand up?" "I dash." The older woman helped her anyway and looked her over. "You seem fine. Next time you know some dark magic is sealed away, don't release it, yes?" Hermione still couldn't process this. It exploded because of the fiend fire? Course it did. This is a dangerous curse. One that is uncontrollable unless cast correctly. Black took out her wand. "I assume it was a student who cast it in the room of requirement. Congrats on opening it, but I'm not sure what we'll find inside." Hermione nodded dumbly, taking out her own wand mechanically. Strange. Of all the times she'd been this close to death, now she was truly shaken. "Hope I didn't scare you too much, Granger. You're welcome to stay behind me. Restrictions or not, I can protect myself." Hermione took note of the sarcasm in her voice, which snapped her out of her thoughts. As if Black, she pushed past the other woman and entered the room of requirement, wand raised. Chapter 8. Chapter Notes. TW. Graphic depictions of death. I'm not entirely sure if that's the exact warning, but let's be safe. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Lestrange saved you? She really saved you. Ginny stared at her in disbelief from where she was propped on her elbows at the foot of Hermione's bed. Hermione nodded without looking up. She was removing soot from the robe she had worn today. Their first trip inside the room of requirement consisted entirely of getting rid of the ashes the fiend fire had left behind. The Muggle way. The room had blocked off all outside magic sources. Not surprising after being set on fire. Hermione was as amused as she was horrified, the prospect of seeing Black at it with a broom giving her enough energy to do her part. It had been worth it. "I know how to work a broom, Granger." "What do you mean I have to sweep? Muggles do that every day?" "Yes," Hermione said, suddenly aware she had been quiet for some time. "Didn't see that coming." "You think she might actually be on our side?" "I honestly don't know." Ginny whistled. "Keep your guard up in any case." "I always do." Long after they bid each other goodnight, Hermione lay with her eyes open and mulled over each of her interactions with Black. There was not one instance where the other which acted predictably. As careful as Hermione was, Black was always able to surprise her. The next day, after a quick breakfast in the burrow, Hermione and Harry operated to Hogsmeade. The Weasleys were going to visit Fred's grave, and the two of them insisted this should be a family-only outing. Along the way to Hogwarts, Hermione shared with Harry what she had with Ginny the previous night. "I can't believe I'm about to say this. And please, when I do, don't remind me of anyone she's killed. But she seems to be on our side after all," Harry said thoughtfully. "She's on her own side, Harry." Hermione felt the need to smack him again. Betrayed by countless people time and time again, he still remained way too trusting. As long as her side's goals align with ours, we have nothing to worry about. Hermione got lost in thoughts about that until it was time to part with Harry and climb up to the room of requirement. Black was already there and had summoned the door, apparently waiting for Hermione to come so they could both venture inside. Morning, Granger. Ready to get some real work done today? Preferably without incinerating ourselves. Hermione flashed a mock smile at the suggestion and pulled out her wand. Ready when you are. Black opened the door, and the two of them entered the room. It still smelled of soot and burnt materials, even though they had cleaned yesterday and the fiend fire had manifested more than a month ago. Hermione swished her wand through the air, supplying herself with a fresh air bubble at the nose and mouth. Show off, Black muttered, but did the same. Split up again? Hermione suggested. And have you set off another curse? You're stuck with me, Granger. Hermione chose not to comment on that as they walked past mountains of charred but somehow still salvageable objects. They spent most of the morning sorting through magical objects that still seemed to work. Hermione thought she noticed Harry's old potions textbook. The Half-Blood Prince, she scoffed to herself as she threw it away into a mountain of other objects lost to time. It was best no one found it ever again. Lunch break? Black said when her stomach churned rather loudly. I skipped breakfast today. You go on, I'll keep going. The room is a lot bigger than the library. Suit yourself, but do try not to demolish anything. Hermione threw a bitten-into green apple at her. When she was left alone, her mind found its usual pace, and she mulled over the experiences since the end of the war. Spending that much time with her torturer hadn't been on her bucket list, but, strangely enough, it wasn't bothering her as much as she had thought it would. Of course, finding Black's ulterior motive remained her, ulterior motive. If she was able to not feel afraid of the woman all the time, this was just a plus. Hermione was tackling a smaller mountain of objects when a cauldron near its base slipped and some of the things higher up toppled down. A pointed hat, an intricately carved box, and a charred body now lay at Hermione's feet. It took her a second. Then she shrieked. Granger! She heard Black yell and hurry next to her. Her eyes, however, could register nothing else but what was undoubtedly the body of Vincent Crabbe. Let's get out of here, Black's voice was emotionless. Hermione turned to stare at her. This is its dash, she tried exasperatedly. It's fine, you can tell me later. Let's get you out of here now. Though her voice was still devoid of emotion, Hermione recognized something in her eyes. Care? Could Black care about something other than herself? She let herself be led out of the room of requirement and sat down on a hardback chair. The other which conjured another one and sat opposite her. Hermione was reliving the accident with Crabbe in her head, and her hands gripped the edge of her seat as hard as she had gripped onto Ron while he flew her out of the room, followed closely by Harry and Draco on another broom. Crabbe had been left behind. He had been barely 18, and they'd left him to burn to death by the cursed fire his own magic had started. Hermione's breathing quickened. She could feel her pulse in her ears. Crabbe lay dead meters away from her. She squeezed her eyes shut. She saw him again. The boy. Just a boy. Whom they'd let die. Granger. The harsh snap made her open her eyes. Black was towering over her, her hands on Hermione's shoulders. Hermione slapped them away and jumped up. What do you think you're doing? Making sure you don't give yourself a heart attack. Your face looks whiter than the Bloody Baron's. Now sit back down. Pretty please, Black added with a roll of her eyes. Hermione didn't want to obey her, but she did. Look who could follow directions without complaint. Not the time for your jokes, Black. Hermione's eyes stung. She was crying before she knew it. It was a long time coming, she supposed. All the stress of going through an actual war, being tortured, losing so many friends and family, finding out her torturer was alive. Crabbe had been the tipping point. Merlin Sagadromid is way better at this. You want me to call for her? Hermione laughed at the ridiculousness of it all. Bellatrix Lester Black, uncomfortable about her crying. You don't know what to do if somebody's crying? Hermione released a shaky laugh amidst the tears. I can do what my mother used to do, but I really don't think you'd be a fan of me hitting you. Hermione blanched at the offhand way Black had just announced she had been abused. Cat got your tongue, Granger? Maybe I am better at consoling people than I give myself credit for. Hermione realized just then that her tears had stopped flowing. Don't let it get to your head, she chuckled. Tilly, Black called softly. An elderly house elf popped up next to them. She had wrinkly skin, but it didn't hang like creatures, a thin body, and frail arms and legs. When she spoke, however, it was with a clear voice. "You called Mistress Black?" "Yes, Tilly. If you could please get us something to eat here and a cup of tea and biscuits for dessert." "Of course, mistress," the elf disapparated. For some reason, Hermione thought the answer sounded strangely haughty for a house elf. "That's our family's house elf," the other woman explained, following the expressions on Hermione's face. "She's been around as long as I can remember. And don't worry," she smirked, "since my parents passed away, I've seen to it she's had a good and fair life." "You like getting into people's heads?" Hermione snarked. "Your SBW movement was infamous, even among the dark side." This shut her up for good. As soon as old Tilly brought vegetable stew and a tray of tea and biscuits, Black conjured a table and set the cutlery. Hermione noticed Tilly was wearing a very clean shirt and a skirt. If she could get her hands on a working time turner now, she would go back in time to tell her past self about having lunch with Bellatrix Lestrange while they were taking a break from repairing Hogwarts. That, and the woman trying to comfort her. She would give herself a heart attack. So house elves and books. Any other hobbies? The occasional one-year-long camping trip, Hermione deadpanned. "Pack a shampoo next time." Hermione laughed earnestly. "You don't really live up to your name, do you, Black?" "Depends on what you mean. You're not all bad, much as I'm loath to admit it. If it helps you feel any better, you're exactly as they describe you. Golden girl and all." The witch smiled proudly at the compliment she'd given out. "You do know nothing about comforting people." "Hey." Black proceeded with excuses that Andromeda was the gentle sister. While they were drinking their tea, she became serious again. "Not that I want to bring you back to that, but we'll have to report it. That was one of your friends back there?" "One of Draco's." "Vincent Crabbe." Hermione barely got the words to go around the lump in her throat. "Ah, yes, I heard. Fiendfire is not a good way to go." He conjured it. Hermione sniffled. "Then he lost control, and we managed to get away. But he dash. I can work out the rest. I'll talk to Minerva. You go take a break." "But the room dash. We'll be here tomorrow, and the day after that, too. I'm supposed to watch you, you know. Didn't you just say I don't live up to my name? Doesn't mean I trust you. You drink tea from people you don't trust?" Black smirked. "With your deeds and motives, you're more in the gray area than the fully dark side." Hermione took note of her reaction. Black's smirk faltered ever so slightly. Her voice when she spoke, however, was no less snappy. "Careful with your words, Granger, or someone will think I imperioused you." Hermione stood up. "Thank you for lunch. See you here tomorrow? Let's take on some of the lower floor classrooms." "Less stairs to climb," Black shrugged nonchalantly. She ushered Hermione away before the latter could question her further. Chapter and notes. As always, I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I finally managed to work on my time management with university and everything, so we're still going strong with this FIC. Thank you to everyone bearing with me. Chapter 9. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Hermione ran inside the classroom and slammed the door behind herself. The other woman inside lifted an eyebrow. "Shut up, Black." Hermione pushed herself away from the door and got to work repairing a broken model of the solar system with all planets and their moons. "I haven't said anything. I can hear it anyway." "Well, that's a problem you need to deal with. Beside your problem with the Weasley boy. I don't have a problem with Ron." So he's following you around like a puppy because he's a devoted friend." Hermione glared at her, but Black chose to ignore it. "It's complicated. You're acting like you shagged him." "Language." Hermione squealed, blushing furiously. Black's eyes were on her immediately. "Merlin Granger, you really dash. We haven't done anything. It was one kiss." She heard her laugh. Hermione turned around to see if her ears were playing tricks on her. Black was focused on what she was doing. The laughter hadn't reached her eyes. "I've had a marriage that was less complicated than your kiss." "You didn't love him?" Black met her eyes. Her gaze was sharp. "Have you seen Rodolphus? There was nothing to even like about him." Hermione turned back to Jupiter and its moons. "Why did you marry him then?" Hermione stole another glance at the woman. There was no trace of a smile, even a fake one, on her face now. "I will bore you with the consequences I would have faced if I didn't marry him. So let's call it a simple school love story and be done with it." Hermione took the hint and got back to work. None of them broke the silence until it was time for lunch, and Hermione got tired of her stomach rumbling loudly. I'll go down for lunch. Do you want something? No. She made her way out of the classroom, wondering about the short answer. Had she really pried too deep asking about Black's marriage? She walked into the Great Hall and was waved over by Ron. She felt dread as she noticed he was sitting alone. Slowly, she began walking over, but someone pushed into her on the way. Hey, oh hey, Granger. Draco Malfoy smiled down at her and began to walk with her. Hope you won't mind me sitting with you. When they reached the table, it was obvious Ron minded. Malfoy, Weasley, Ron, where are the others? Hermione hurried to engage him in conversation. Harry and Ginny already ate, he said, his eyes still on Draco. How's the preparations for the new year going down here? Draco asked offhandedly. Good, I suppose, Ron shrugged. I heard there's going to be a ball before the reopening. That's nice, Hermione said. I see the Great Hall is ready. Just need some finishing touches. Draco looked around. I'm working on the astronomy tower, and the top floors are done. We've done good with clearing the grounds too, Ron nodded. I wonder if we'll be invited to the ball, Draco said. If not, it's been a good summer. Of course you'll be invited, Hermione swatted his arm. Now, more importantly, are you two going back for 7th year? Do we have to? Ron complained. Hermione gave him a look. I am. It will get me out of the house where my aunt will probably come to live. Draco smiled emptily. Am I the only one going because I want it? Yes, the two boys said in unison. They shared a laugh, albeit a short one. Hermione finished the last of her soup and stood up. Well, I better get going. Supervising and everything. I'll join you, Draco said quickly. I'm going to the upper floors anyway. All right. See you later, Ron, she said as friendly as she could. The defeated look on his face broke her heart. She vowed to speak to him soon. Just not today, which she could thank Draco for. Not to be rude, but why did you stay with us? She asked the blonde as soon as they were alone. Rude. And to answer your question, it was the only way to avoid further confrontations with my aunt. Black sent you here? Draco nodded, bumping her shoulder. You owe me now. Astoria likes you. How does everyone know? Hermione giggled, remembering Ginny telling her how Astoria had asked her whether Draco liked her. It's a sixth sense. Go for it. She ran off before he could pester her again. The next day, she found another excuse not to talk to Ron at lunch. McGonagall had stood up, asking for everyone's attention. Thank you, all of you here, and the ones who work with us but cannot be here. You have helped win the war. You are working to rebuild our world and forget old quarrels and outdated beliefs. The closer we're getting to the beginning of a new school year, the more it looks like the castle is more than ready to welcome bright young minds again. So I want to invite you all to the Hogwarts opening ball, what I hope is going to turn into an annual celebration. Join us here in the Great Hall next Saturday, and let's walk into this new era in good spirits. Everyone clapped and cheered. George whistled. Hermione, Harry, Ron, and Ginny got to planning at once. We're going, right? Of course we are. We'll be dressing up. Can't we just wear what we wore for the old ball? Good luck fitting into it and getting Ron to wear that hideous dress again. It was robes. Hermione left lunch feeling her heart was as full as her stomach. She hadn't made 10 steps out of the Great Hall when she heard her name being called. She recognized Ron's voice, and her heart dropped right into her stomach. Hey, Mione. She turned around to see Ron striding over to her. Damn long legs. Ron, if you think Merlin I caught you this time, he was beaming. Hermione didn't like where this was going. So, I was thinking, Ron began, since there's going to be a ball and everything, would you like to go with me? Hermione tried to smile, but felt it was unsuccessful when Ron's own smile fell. Ron, I love you, I really do. I don't think we'd work out this way. He took a step back. Hermione tried, but he shook his head. No, it's Dash. It was Ron's turn to fake a smile. It's all right, I just thought, Dash, I don't want to ruin our friendship, Hermione said. Yes, of course, Ron turned to go. See you around. Hermione watched him turn the corner, and she began making her way to the astronomy tower. She walked out onto the balcony where Black was putting together parts of the castle wall. Hermione got to work silently, ignoring the woman's questions. Black didn't press much and gave up quickly. Hermione attempted to keep her thoughts and feelings separate, even though she knew Black could easily destroy her defense if she tried. Somehow, Hermione was quite certain the witch wouldn't try anything. Chapter and notes. Again, sorry for taking too long, but I hope you enjoyed this installment. Already working on the next one. Chapter 10. Chapter notes. I have absolutely no excuse for how much I made you wait, so I'll just say I hope you like this chapter. Enjoy. Hermione looked at herself in the mirror one last time. The pink gown hugged her body well. Maybe Victor had been right. Pink was her color. Hermione took her beaded bag and stuck her wand inside too. The heels were the last thing she put on. It was painful already, but it was worth it. The silvery glitter paired well with the pink dress. She exited the room and made her way down the stairs quietly, making sure to keep her heels from clacking too much. She didn't need to set off Walburga Black and listen to her speech about impure blood besmirching the house of her ancestors. She and Harry had moved to Grimmauld Place earlier this week. The official version had been that they didn't want to intrude on the Weasleys any longer. In truth, Ron had been acting more and more distant every day since Hermione rejected him for the Hogwarts reopening ball. While Harry whispered, he was a wow himself in his dark blue dress robes. She smiled down at him. He waited for her to come down the stairs and offered her his arm. "Shall we, milady? Don't you have a lady to pick up?" Hermione raised her eyebrows. "Let me first see you off to Hogsmeade. You look wonderful, by the way." Hermione swatted his arm lightly. "Harry Potter, when did you become such a gentleman?" He simply smiled and opened the door for her. Hermione walked out and made her way towards the street. "You'll wait for us at the broomsticks?" Harry finally spoke in a normal voice when he closed the front door. "If I have to," Hermione hurried to continue before he could interrupt her. "You and Ginny don't have to babysit me, Harry. I'll be fine." "It's not babysitting. It's spending the evening with you, because Ron's decided to act like a prat, where you two can just spend the evening by yourselves. And your fans." Hermione dodged the red sparks he sent her way with his wand. "See you at the Three Broomsticks," Harry said. Hermione disapparated without a word. Hogsmeade was as peaceful as always when there were no students around. Hermione had operated right in front of Madame Rosmerta's establishment, and she made her way inside, heading over to the bar. "Miss Hermione Granger," Rosmerta greeted her. Hermione was thankful the pub was almost empty. "Madame Rosmerta, hello. Headed to the Hogwarts ball?" "Yes. But first something to kickstart the night. And help me survive it. A fire whiskey is coming your way." "Thank you." Hermione sat down at a nearby table and tried to appear as small as possible and avoid eye contact with the group of men in the corner. One of them smiled at her. She shivered in disgust. "There you go, Miss Granger." Madame Rosmerta seemed intent on saying her name loudly and clearly every time. "Thank you." Hermione took out a couple of galleons and handed them to her. "I'll just dash." She chugged the contents of the glass Rosmerta had brought her, trying not to show how it burned her throat. "See you around." Hermione was proud of how she managed to avoid a coughing fit. She quickly made her way out of the Three Broomsticks, trying to ignore the men who whistled as she stood up. Outside, she doubled over and coughed hard, nearly vomiting the alcohol. Someone clapped her on the back, and she straightened up quickly. "Whoa there, Granger. Keep the head down before you get whatever you drank all over my boots." Hermione's eyes had watered, but when her vision cleared, she saw Bellatrix Black standing in front of her in her usual black corset dress and high-heel boots. "It was not much. I was just in a rush." Hermione was finally able to breathe. "The ball isn't for another half hour," Black said. "And the first 2 hours are no fun. Get there when Phileas reaches his 5th glass of alcohol. From then on, it's a party." "Have a lot of experience with partying with the professors?" "My lips are sealed. I was looking for you, by the way." "Oh." Hermione was genuinely surprised. "Yes, it's this little thing." Black waved a piece of paper in front of her face. "Shacklebolt signed it this morning. You're officially a free woman?" "Indeed. I wanted to make sure you know I'm not your responsibility anymore," Black smirked. "I also have my magic back." Cower in fright. Hermione rolled her eyes. "Very funny. So you'll be celebrating tonight?" Was headed to the Hog's Head. "McGonagall insists I catch the beginning of the ball. At least, so I'll have to come up." "You should stay. You worked as hard as everyone else." "I could say I've had my fill of the castle this summer." A pop nearby had them both turn to see Harry and Ginny coming up to them. "My cue to leave. See you at the ball." "Or not." Black winked at her and sauntered away down the street. "Hey, Hermione. Black giving you a hard time?" Harry asked. "Flaunting Kingsley's letter of pardon," Hermione replied. "I guess she did earn it. If you couldn't find anything on her for the whole summer, maybe she doesn't have hidden motives," Ginny said. "Forget Black. Tonight we should celebrate like there's no tomorrow. Especially since we're starting school tomorrow Harry grabbed both women's hands. Let's go. The Hogwarts Great Hall had already begun to fill by the time they got there. The decorations for the ball were wonderful. Candles floated underneath the ceiling, bathing the space in a warm light. There were 2 long tables at one end of the hall, and a lot of free space for dancing, Hermione supposed. The tables were already filling up, and Hermione, Harry, and Ginny made a beeline for 3 of the seats furthest away from the headmistress and the Order of the Phoenix. Their goal tonight was to have fun. As people continued to gather around, Hermione saw the Weasleys enter through the double doors. She tried to catch Ron's eye, but he was looking at the opposite end of the table. He'll come around. Harry placed a hand over hers. If he doesn't do it on its own, we can help. Ginny was staring daggers at the back of Ron's head. Really, he's acting like Percy now. Hermione engaged Ginny in some light conversation while Harry got up to go greet some old schoolmates. If Ron wanted to stay away, so be it. She wouldn't be the one to cause a scene. The Great Hall soon welcomed the last of the guests, and Mr. Filch closed the double doors. There were a handful of people standing up. Everyone else had fit at the tables. Professor McGonagall was getting to her feet to begin a speech, no doubt. Hermione's eyes scanned the Great Hall one last time. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she didn't find it anyway. So she turned to face the headmistress and listened intently. "Welcome," McGonagall's voice carried around. "To all those who fought for this castle, who saved it, who were there to pick up the pieces afterwards. Welcome and thank you." A round of applause resounded throughout the hall. "I am happy to share tonight with you all, and proud. Let us celebrate the new era we are entering. Let us have fun tonight." More applause and some whistling and catcalling. Uncharacteristically, McGonagall smiled at that as she sat down. "A toast, ladies." Harry had grabbed his goblet the moment the wine had appeared inside. "To new beginnings. Hear, hear. Cheers." Hermione put some steak and mashed potatoes onto her plate and dug in. Around her, conversation flowed. Remus and Tonks sat a few seats away and were chatting happily with Harry, any arguments forgotten. Neville and Luna had come over to see them, and Hermione found herself embracing her friends. "How are you, Hermione?" Neville put a hand on her shoulder. "Summer with Lestrange tire you out?" "I pulled through." "We all did," Ginny said. A toast to that. As the night progressed, people left the tables and filled the dance floor, letting loose to the sound of music that seemed to be coming from the castle itself. It felt as if Hogwarts was praising them all for their hard work. Hermione spent some time dancing as a third wheel with Harry and Ginny, then Neville swept her up into a dance. Afterwards, Luna grabbed her hand, and in the end, she even got to share a twirl with Draco. "Looking nice, Granger." "Is this a compliment I'm hearing, Malfoy?" "Consider it payback for 4th year when I was an ass and didn't say it." She smiled at him as he jumped away from her, only to spin her back into his arms. "I'm flattered," she said, "and you look handsome too. So, save these great moves for Astoria over there." Hermione winked at him and let go of his hands, stepping back. She looked over the dance floor, smiling at all the happy faces she saw. They'd done it. Grabbing a glass of champagne from the table, she maneuvered around people and quietly slipped out of the Great Hall through a tapestry that led out into the entrance hall. Hermione walked out and sat on the stairs, breathing in the fresh air and admiring the starry sky above. The enchanted ceiling in the Great Hall was magical, yes, but nothing like the true shine of the stars. Had enough of the party already? Hermione turned to watch Black slip through the double doors too. "I'll be there tomorrow for the feast anyway," Hermione muttered. "Castle's not going to miss me. So, 8th year? More like a 7th since you ruined it for me. And once again, I can't really defend myself, can I?" Hermione expected her to be ashamed at least. Instead, Black was grinning at her. She felt her blood boil again. She stood up. "It really doesn't affect you, does it?" "Pardon? The fact that you did ruin people's lives? The fact that people died because of you? The fact that everyone suffered, including your family whom you're blabbering about standing up for. Everyone suffered and you're just standing there, acting like it doesn't matter because you fought for your ideals. Some twisted ideals you have." Hermione hadn't realized she'd raised her voice. Not until it carried over the empty lawns. Black was standing in front of her, calmly looking at her. Where Hermione was breathing heavily, fists balled, a bit of sweat trickling down her forehead, and if the heat in her cheeks was any indication, her face red, Black stood there pale as a ghost in the moonlight, breathing evenly, her posture relaxed. Hermione saw it in her eyes, however. The same eyes she'd thought she was seeing some light in, that had seemed so like her sister's lately, Andromeda's dark brown. These eyes were now black. Seemingly bottomless pits Hermione was sure to fall into if she wasn't careful. And she hadn't been careful. She'd yelled at a convicted murderer. Her hand twitched, wishing it could hold on to the safety of her wand. But Black would be faster. Black seemed to have no intention of pulling out her wand, however. Instead, she opened her mouth to speak, and Hermione could swear that cold voice sent goosebumps down her back. You think I don't know the price of my decisions? The cost of what I did. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it rang in Hermione's ears. Black hadn't moved from where she was. She was shorter, yet Hermione couldn't help but feel as if the older woman was staring her down. You think I need a filthy mudblood to remind me of how I failed the mission I risked everything for? Hermione cried out and clutched her left forearm as it burned at Black's words. She glared at the woman through tear-filled eyes. Black looked taken aback, as if she was only now registering what she had said. Hermione found herself running down the path towards the gates. She couldn't bear the pain. She couldn't bear the anger she felt, the betrayal. She disapparated as soon as she was off the Hogwarts grounds. Chapter 11. Chapter notes. Again, apologies for the wait, but this chapter is finally here, and the next one is already in the works. Enjoy! I would also like to welcome Professor Black, who agreed to teach care for magical creatures this year, since our groundskeeper deserves his break. Hermione had seen red. She had left the feast before it had even begun, slowly climbing the stairs to Gryffindor Tower. Black, a teacher, and care for magical creatures of all things. The only creature she cared about was herself. Hermione thought bitterly. Yet the students and faculty had taken it with an air of resignation. A few people had even clapped. Now, Hermione was glad she hadn't signed up for the course. She mumbled the password to the fat lady as she stood in front of the portrait. Quite correct, but why the long face? The woman in the portrait inquired. And isn't Gryffindor missing our golden girl at the feast? They have other famous figures to obsess over. If you insist on sulking, the fat lady trailed off, and when she saw Hermione had no intentions of answering, the portrait swung open to reveal the entrance to Gryffindor Tower. She looked at the familiar room, decorated scarlet, the fire crackling pleasantly in the fireplace. She had missed this. It was her home more than any other place now. Wishing to distract herself from thoughts about her parents, she quickly climbed the spiral staircase to her dormitory and lay on the bed to read a book. Nothing like getting ready for her transfiguration class next morning. She heard people shuffling outside some time later, but since none of the girls from Gryffindor had returned for their 8th year, she had the dormitory to herself. Unfortunately, not even the advanced transfiguration theories managed to get her mind off Black and her schemes to get under everyone else's skin. She looked out the window and saw the windows of Hagrid's hut shone yellow. Making up her mind, Hermione cast a disillusionment charm on herself and left the dormitory. The common room was bustling with movement, as everyone was too excited to go to sleep apparently. She doubted anyone would have cared if she'd just snuck out past them, but then again, Golden Girl and everything. She felt safe getting rid of the disillusionment charm once she was out of the castle. She walked slowly down across the lawns, breathing in the night air. Her wand hung loosely in her hand. She doubted she'd have to use it, but it had become a habit. Coming up to Hagrid's front door, she knocked 3 times and plastered a smile on her face. She was happy to see him. She really was. She just couldn't smile in earnest now. Who might you be? Hagrid's giant frame appeared in the doorway. Memories flashed through Hermione's mind of previous times he had opened the door to see her on the other side. Her, Harry, and Ron. Hermione. Hagrid's voice pulled her away from her thoughts. She stepped forward into his outstretched arms and gave him a hug. Hagrid, it's great to see you. You too. Come in, come in. Hermione smiled up at him and walked past him. Tea? Hagrid asked, already taking out a large mug. Of course. I have missed this. Hermione sat at the table where she was immediately faced with Fong leaning his head in her lap and drooling over her robes so she would pet him. Ah, so have I. Hagrid sat down opposite her. Where are the boys? Partying in the common room, I suppose. Hermione shrugged. You're not too keen on a party now? The headmistress announced who your substitute was going to be, she said glumly. Hagrid placed his large hand on her shoulder. I only found out tonight, too. Can't really tell you anything to comfort you. It's all right. I mean, it's not, but I won't be taking her classes. I just want to know how she managed to get under everyone's skin, she huffed. Either she's really trustworthy, or she's a really clever liar. They looked each other in the eyes, silently agreeing which one it was. Hagrid turned the conversation away from Black, asking about Hermione's future plans. Blimey, I'm looking at the next Minister for Magic here, he boomed when he heard her thoughts. I wouldn't go that far, Dash. Nonsense. You'll be great. Golden Girl will be the last thing people will think to call you in a couple years. Painting such a pretty picture. I can't help but want to believe you, Hermione smiled. There is no chance our Hermione won't achieve her goals. Don't let Lestrange sabotage your last year again. Finish school as you would have and go make us proud. Black Hermione blurted out, cursing herself for it. Wah, nothing. Yes, finish school and get to accomplishing my goals. I just have to listen to you, Hagrid. After 3 cups of tea, Hermione finally managed to convince Hagrid she had to go. Bring Harry and Ron round next time, Hagrid said as he was seeing her off. Will do, Hermione assured him again, crossing fingers behind her back. Good night, Hagrid. Good night. When Hermione slipped back into Gryffindor Tower, everyone had already gone to sleep. She crept up to her dormitory, relieved she wouldn't have to speak with someone. Sleep came easy now considering the late hour and her relaxing talk with Hagrid. He was right. She wouldn't allow Black to thwart her education once again. Next morning at breakfast, Hermione sat with Ginny, watching Professor McGonagall walk along the tables, stopping to talk to the prefects. Hermione had received a letter she would be head girl a few days before term began. She wondered who got to be head boy. Hey, Gin, did Harry get a letter about being head boy? She asked. Harry? Being head boy? Yeah, sure, Ginny chuckled. Heard McGonagall opted for Malfoy. Harry and Ronald stopped to congratulate him on our way in. Sure enough, when Hermione looked at the double doors, she saw the 3 boys there, engaged in conversation. Good for them, I guess, she said glumly. He's going to come around. Ginny rolled her eyes. Ron isn't Ron if he isn't a bit of a prat every now and then. Hermione wished this wouldn't be the time he was a prat, but Ron was Ron. She turned away just as Draco clapped both boys on the shoulders and began walking towards her. Tell me Draco isn't coming, she whispered. Good morning, Draco's voice sounded behind her. Morning, Malfoy, Ginny snickered. Oh, turn around, Granger. I'm not going to mention Weasley. Heard your head boy, Hermione turned to him nonchalantly. And congratulations to you too, head girl, he smiled. McGonagall said she wanted to talk to us. Great, Hermione finished her glass of pumpkin juice. I'm probably getting an earful on why the head girl doesn't leave the welcoming feast. Or she's letting us know about our responsibilities. Draco sneaked a piece of toast off her plate. Stay positive. Hermione sighed as she watched the headmistress make her way over to them. Good morning, Mr. Malfoy, Miss Granger. Miss Weasley. Shall we? She motioned at Hermione and Draco. After you two, Draco said smoothly. Hermione made a face at him behind McGonagall's back. So, the headmistress began, leading them out of the Great Hall and into a secluded corridor. Congratulations on your posts first. As you know, the head boy and girl are a tad more involved with helping the teachers out, meaning we patrol the corridors with them at night, Draco said. Indeed. For 2 hours only, 9 until 11 o'clock. 3 times a week. I assume neither of you is going to have a problem managing their time between this and your upcoming NEWTS? No, they answered in unison. Indeed. Then, Mr. Malfoy, you are with me on Tuesdays, with Professor Flitwick on Thursdays, and with Professor Trelawney on Saturdays. Sounds good, Draco nodded. This leaves you with Professor Sprout on Mondays, with me on Wednesdays, and with Professor Black on Fridays. Miss Granger, any questions? Draco jumped in before Hermione could say a word. Perhaps I could switch with Hermione on Fridays. She could take my Saturdays. I'm not too keen to patrol then. I'll gladly take Trelawney. Hermione nodded eagerly. Professor Black asked for you specifically, Miss Granger, McGonagall said apologetically. Now off to classes with you both. She had already disappeared from the corridor by the time Hermione opened her mouth. Black had asked for her specifically? Merlin. Draco looked as dumbfounded as her. What does my aunt want with you? Suppose I'll find out on Friday, Hermione said grimly. Thank you for trying to save me. He simply patted her back with a tentative smile and walked away. Hermione gritted her teeth. If Black was asking for a challenge, she was not backing down. Chapter 12. Time apparently flew by when something unpleasant was coming up. Hermione, who had always felt like the first week of school dragged pleasantly slow, couldn't believe the weekend was already only a day away. How was patrolling with McGonagall last night? Harry asked her offhandedly, while they were having a quick lunch before defense against the dark arts. A piece of cake. Maybe that's the universe's way of apologizing in advance for tomorrow. Harry heard the bitter note in her tone. Luna's taking Black's classes. She said she isn't that bad. He tried to cheer her up. Next to him, Draco snorted. Loony deserves her nickname then if she thinks my aunt is a good teacher, he said. You could patrol with Trelawney today. Hermione, just tell her there was a mix-up in the schedule. I'll deal with my aunt tomorrow. Shouldn't Trelawney have foreseen the mix-up? Ginny joked. Hermione looked up at the high table where Black sat at the end, reading the Prophet and munching on a sandwich. I do want to get you in trouble with McGonagall. She turned to Draco, or your aunt for that matter. He smiled at her sadly. Hey, came a voice behind her. Hermione turned around to see Ron looking down at her. I'm done with lunch. Want to walk to Dada together? Of course, Hermione tried to not let her voice betray her surprise. Look who finally decided to act like a man, Ginny muttered. Eat your pie. Ron rolled his eyes and dragged Hermione away. Not to sound as rude as Ginny did, Hermione began as they made their way out of the Great Hall. But I am glad we're talking again. Ginny's right. Not that she needs to know that. Ron grinned sheepishly. And I have to apologize. I've been behaving like a child. It's all right. I'm just glad we can be friends. Of course, best friends, Ron said. Now, I heard you're patrolling the corridors with Black tonight. Want me to come with us? I'll keep my distance. Thanks for the offer, but I'll pass. I don't want to find out what she does to students she catches out of bed. Well, if you need anything, just in case. Hermione looked at what he was handing her. A galleon. Is that Dash? I couldn't find the one you made, but I read about the protean charm, and this should work. Hermione inspected the galleon and its symbols. That's a great job. No one would suspect it's fake. Thanks, Ron. She hugged him and noticed a slight blush in his cheeks when she pulled away. It's nothing. I couldn't make more than 2, but I'll get Harry as soon as you send a message. I hope I won't have to. Did you try to get out of being scheduled with her? He asked. Didn't work. McGonagall said she asked for me specifically. She did? That's odd. And creepy, Ron shuddered. I'll talk to Harry about borrowing the invisibility cloak once a week. Hermione let him babble away about different ways he could follow her and Black undetected. She was simply happy to be with one of her best friends again. Professor Lupin, whom everyone was glad to see back in Hogwarts, spent an hour talking to them about NEWTS, which gave Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny plenty of time to talk about Ron's success with the fake galleons. Wow, so you're one of the smart siblings, Ginny whispered. Percy number 2. I'm nothing like Percy, Ron whispered back fiercely. Hermione chuckled, which prompted everyone to stare at their small group. Our 8th-year heroes, Lupin's eyes twinkled. Perhaps one of you would like to tell us what I have prepared for you today. Hermione looked at the plant on Lupin's desk. Werewolves, she suggested, recognizing the wolfsbane. Correct, although I will keep the 10 points for Gryffindor for when someone else of the infamous trio answers, Lupin said. Now then, we didn't really teach you much about defending yourselves against werewolves back in 3rd year, so pay attention. After their classes for the day, Hermione, Harry, Ron, and Ginny got together with a couple others from Dumbledore's army to mainly tease Draco about his upcoming patrol with Trelawney. It's in the tea leaves. I see it. Malfoy will catch us out of bed tonight. They won't even have to walk around. They can just have a tea party in Trelawney's tower. She knows who's going to break the rules anyway. Hey, Malfoy, better get ready to see the Grim tonight. Hermione laughed along with everyone else, happy that they had the chance to share such times together safe. Just for a few hours, she forgot where she was going to be this time. Tomorrow. Chapter 13. Chapter notes. I'm feeling ready to deliver again, so await a new chapter in the next few days partying phase for now. Enjoy. Hermione tumbled out of the portrait hole and into the corridor. The fat lady swung the portrait behind her, leaving her alone in the candlelit corridor. Her friend's words of encouragement did little to help with her anxiety. Was Black going to talk to her? Apologize? No, definitely not that. She would probably try to bully her into forgiving her. Hermione's fingers tightened around her wand. Let her try that. Still deep in thought, she stumbled into the great hall where she was supposed to meet Black. The witch was on the opposite end, leaning against the Slytherin table, inspecting her nails. Good evening, Hermione called out before approaching her. She knew better than to startle a snake. Oh, Granger, right on time. Black lifted her head and met her eyes. Hermione took note of the absence of any feeling in them. Would you like to patrol together or separate? Even her tone was indifferent. The woman really was oblivious to anyone else's feelings. If you're all right with separate, thank you, she answered coldly. Black simply spun on her heels and began making her way out of the Great Hall. I will take the lower floors and the dungeons. Report to me if you see a student out of bed. Hermione watched her retreating figure, barely restraining herself from hurling a jinx her way. She waited until Black was sure to have disappeared in some corridor or other. Then Hermione made her way out and back up the spiral staircase. She could go back to Gryffindor Tower and Black would be none the wiser. Instead, Hermione decided she wasn't going to cower and turned into the right wing of the 4th floor. She walked around the whole floor twice before climbing up the stairs again. Hermione wasn't bothered by the dark or the silence. A war does that to people, she supposed. What really bothered her was how she still saw Crabbe's body whenever she closed her eyes, and how she still heard his parents' cries in McGonagall's office. Black had escorted her out of there as soon as they told the story of how they'd found him. Back when she was playing nice, Black had seemed almost human to Hermione. Then again, she shouldn't have forgotten who she was dealing with. Everything was calm on the 5th floor. Ascending to the next one, Hermione kept replaying her interactions with Black in her head. So much so that when she collided into a mass of black hair, she let out a shriek. Something fell on the ground in front of her with a thud. Afraid she would be faced with an unconscious Death Eater once again, she looked down at a cardboard cutout in the shape of a person with a grotesque face drawn on it. The black eyes and the curly strands of thread glued to the head made Hermione realize the joke. She glared at the nook where the cardboard had been thrown at her from. Peeves whizzed out of their cackling. B-O-W-E. Golden Girl get a boo-boo from Peevesy's big bad laugh eater. Frustrated enough already, Hermione was ready to snap back when Peeves' laughter suddenly stopped and he gripped his throat, looking around in what she recognized as fear. It was so uncharacteristic of him. Hermione was taken aback for a moment and didn't think much of what had gotten into him. You haven't forgotten what happens when you play around with me, have you, you insipid little cockroach? Hermione and Peeves both looked towards where the sing-song voice was coming from. Black was striding over, her wand raised. Peeves was clawing at his throat. The witch smiled. Perhaps you have. Perhaps I ought to teach you a lesson. Peeves shook his head frantically. Black lowered her wand, and the poltergeist gasped for breath. And no need to waste your time on little old Peeves, ma'am. He'll stay out of your way, he assured her. Hermione heard respect in his voice for the first time ever. She remembered Harry saying Peeves only showed respect to Dumbledore and the Bloody Baron. Suppose Black was on the VIP list too. You do that, or don't, at your own risk. Black's smile made the hairs on the back of Hermione's neck stand up. Peeves shivered. Peeves will be a good poltergeist. Get out of here. Black rolled her eyes and pocketed her wand. Peeves was out without another word. Hermione had no idea what to say, so she simply watched Black peer closely at Peeves' cardboard creation. I have to say, there is no better insult than mistaking me for this, Granger. I would say supremacists should tick you off way more. Touché. I didn't think of Peeves when I suggested we split up. Black looked up at her. I don't usually get scared of him, Hermione muttered defensively. He just surprised me, that's all. Something makes me think you'll pick dealing with him over me anytime. Split up again? You don't have to worry about his tricks now. For one crazy, thoughtless moment, Hermione was ready to say no. Peeves' reaction to Black had piqued her interest. And how had the other woman shown up so quickly? Had she been following her? No. Hermione would have heard her. Or so she thought. Either way, she wasn't going to find out tonight. Or anytime soon. I'll report to you if I see a student out of bed. Hermione walked past Black and down the corridor with a smug smile on her face. Two could play Black's game, and Hermione would play to win. Chapter 14, Chapter Notes. I surprised myself with how quickly I came up with this grinning face with sweat and joy. Hermione soon felt Friday night patrols turn into a routine. She would go down to the Great Hall, murmur a half-hearted good evening, then Black would split their work and each would stick to her own half of the castle. When 11 o'clock struck, Hermione would make her way over to Gryffindor Tower. Black had never asked her to inform her before turning in, and Hermione didn't. Her friends' worries faded away after the first few uneventful weeks, and Hermione felt life finally returning as close to normal as possible. The only strange part was how Peeves seemed to be avoiding Hermione at all costs now. She noticed it when she was going to the library one day, and he was hovering over the entrance, dropping stinking pellets on top of anybody who entered or exited the library. When he saw Hermione, however, Peeves actually swooped down to catch the pellet he had just thrown at an unsuspecting second year, and flew away blabbering hurriedly. Nasty pellet about to hit the itsy-bitsy second year. Good thing Peevesy was there to catch it. No worries, head girl. Peevesy, make sure you encounter no trouble. Hermione shook her head and went to reassure the girl. All the same, Peeves' unnatural behavior bewildered her. Harry and Ron were the next to notice. The three of them were exploring a potentially promising new secret passageway on the 6th floor when Peeves rounded the corner. Why? Who do we have here? Heroic Potty the Champ. In his glorified sidekick's dash, Peeves stopped himself. Ooh, head girl in the corridor. Peevesy must go. Make sure no one is flooding toilets or stacking dumb bombs somewhere. Peevesy is off. With that, the poltergeist swooped away where he came from. Did Peeves just leave us alone? Ron asked incredulously. You weren't joking, Mione, Harry snickered. I think Black broke him. Wonder what she did to him to make him so afraid, Ron said. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I miss the old Peeves, Hermione sighed. It's disconcerting to have him be respectful towards me. Enjoy while it lasts, Harry patted her on the back. And keep hanging out with us so we can enjoy it too. By the next Friday, Hermione had decided she wanted answers. Halloween was 3 days away, so the castle was decorated accordingly. Making her way down to the Great Hall, Hermione dodged hovering bats, jumping skeletons, and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and walls. Black was poking a bat with her wand when Hermione walked into the Great Hall. The older woman pulled away from it rather sheepishly when Hermione announced her presence. Yes, good evening. Feel like touring the West Wing today. Black was already making her way past Hermione, not sparing her a glance. Actually, I was wondering if you'd agree to patrol together tonight. Black's heeled boot clacked loudly as she halted. You want to patrol together? Her voice betrayed nothing, but Hermione could bet she was surprised. Meeting Black's eyes, she nodded. In other words, you want us to cover less ground, so I have to stay up late after you go to bed. Smart move. Black turned away and began making her way out again. Hermione smirked and followed her, jogging a bit to catch up. And it's boring to walk around alone. I'm used to doing it with 2 boys at my heels. Your trio is infamous amongst teachers. First thing McGonagall said about patrols. Any strange occurrence can be explained by Potter and friends hiding beneath an invisibility cloak. It can't fit the 3 of us anymore, Hermione muttered. The wizarding world has to be thankful for all the times that Cloak did conceal you. They let the silence stretch as they made their way around the dungeons. Hermione was surprised by how easily the conversation had begun to flow between them. She reminded herself Black was a Legilimens and tried to steer her thoughts away from the doubts she had about her allegiance. I have to ask, Hermione began after failing to think of anything else. What is Peeves so afraid of you? The poltergeist, Black spat. Is he still going on with his pranks? Not with me. It's so strange. You miss him? The other witch raised an eyebrow. He's one of Hogwarts' symbols. It's funny not having him be rude to me as much as everybody else. He's always been like that. Got on my nerves a lot when I was in school. A smile made its way on a Black's face. I had my way with him whenever he got too annoying. Well, now you reminded him and he started to respect me too. Not as fun as I thought it would be. Trust me, Granger, Peeves knows no respect. He fears me. Closest thing he ever felt to respect was with my cousin and his friends. Black trailed off, and Hermione knew she meant Sirius, Harry's father, Lupin, and Pettigrew. She cleared her throat. Yes, the pranksters of our time at school also got along with Peeves. The Weasley twins, you mean? Hermione nodded. Now, she was the one reminiscing. I saw their shop back when they opened it, Black nodded. Good boys. Shame one of them died. Hermione felt anger bubbling up inside her again. Yes, shame, she gritted out. I do feel sorry about all the losses, Black said quietly. Hermione glanced sideways at her and saw her eyes were fixed on the ground. You do? Black let out a hollow laugh. I know you think I'm a monster, but I do know what remorse is. I feel bad for letting one of my cousins die, for killing the other, for all the losses in the war. Molly and Arthur Weasley don't deserve to grieve over a child. Neville Longbottom doesn't deserve to watch his parents struggle to exist. You don't deserve to have nightmares about Malfoy Manor. But you probably do. And I'm sorry. I'm also sorry I called you at the ball. Hermione squeezed her forearm instinctively. Black's eyes flicked over to her. Does it hurt? Hermione didn't want to show weakness. It's fine, she waved her off, continuing down the corridor. They were already on the second floor. Surely 11 o'clock was close. Wait, Granger. Black caught up to her and fixed her with a look. Cursed wounds hurt. You should have it checked out. It's not something I brandish around with pride, Hermione said scathingly. Let me have a look then. Please. Hermione was ready to scoff and storm away. But Black's eyes were boring into hers almost pleadingly. She reluctantly rolled up her sleeve and exposed her left forearm. Her right hand held onto her wand, an Expelliarmus on Hermione's lips. Black made no move to touch her. Does it flare up? She asked cautiously. It burns when the word is spoken. Black gasped. She straightened up and looked at Hermione again. Go to bed, Granger. Hermione was taken aback at the sudden change in attitude. Black was already on the move and striding away faster than Hermione thought it possible. She was soon left standing alone in the dark corridor. Fed up with the woman's mood swings, Hermione turned on her heel and marched in the other direction, using some passageways to make it to Gryffindor Tower quickly. The fat lady didn't even try to talk her up before letting her inside the common room. Hermione saw her friends had turned in for the night, so she made her way past the few chatting Gryffindors and climbed up to her dormitory. The next day, she was hoping to see Black at breakfast or lunch to at least know if the woman would even acknowledge her presence. She didn't show up for either meal, however, and at dinner when Hermione saw Professor McGonagall approaching her, she was right to think it had something to do with yesterday. Hello, Miss Granger, the headmistress greeted. There has been a change in your schedule for patrolling the corridors. A change? Hermione questioned. Harry, Ron, and Ginny lifted their heads too. Indeed. Your Fridays are free as of today. Professor Black decided she doesn't need your help. You are free to use your time more productively. You have your exams and graduation coming up. McGonagall smiled at them all and bid them good night. Hermione scanned the high table. Black was nowhere to be seen. Congratulations, Mione. Ginny clapped her back. She let you go. Hooray, Hermione laughed along with the others. Only when the topic of Black was closed did she notice Harry was still looking at her questioningly. Something happened between you two? He whispered when Ron and Ginny started bickering over something. Nothing unusual, Hermione dismissed him. She knew he had noticed Black's absence today too, however. Still, Hermione considered this a battle she would face on her own. So she simply smiled at Harry and joined into Ron and Ginny's conversation. Chapter 15. Chapter notes. Story's writing itself at this point. I'm sitting back, enjoying it, and my uni work is piling up, but you guys enjoy this next chapter. Black was absent from all meals for the next couple of days. At the Halloween feast, Hermione didn't see her either, and then November rolled around. Hermione couldn't convey her worries to anyone since she hadn't shared with her friends what had happened on her last encounter with Black. Harry had tried getting something out of her a few times, but she had resolutely avoided the question. One day Hermione was walking down from the library towards Transfiguration class when she noticed through the window a group of people on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Even from this distance, Black's curly hair was a giveaway. Hermione leaned on the windowsill and watched as the class gathered close to the trees. They seemed to be looking at something inside the forest. Hermione squinted, but she couldn't make out anything. Transfiguration. Class was due to begin in 5 minutes. Hermione's internal struggle was a short one. She was already 5 chapters ahead, and McGonagall had said today's lesson would be mostly theoretical. Hoping the headmistress wouldn't miss her too much in class, Hermione banished her books to her dormitory and hurried out of the castle. The weather was settling into winter now, and Hermione shivered as soon as she slipped through the double doors. She shrugged it off and set off at a brisk pace down the lawns. It seemed like Black had just dismissed the students. She passed them on her way down. They were talking excitedly amongst themselves. Can you believe it? He actually came? My sister told me she studied centaurs in 6th year, but she never saw one in person. Centaurs showing themselves to the students? It seemed as if Hermione would have to worry about Black slipping her whatever she had slipped the 6 years to make them believe a centaur had come for their lesson. As she neared the Forbidden Forest and Black came in sight, however, Hermione saw her standing at the tree's edge talking to a dark-haired centaur with a black body and shiny tail. The two seemed deep in conversation, and the centaur was even wearing something akin to a smile on his face. Black was facing the other way, and Hermione wondered if she was also smiling the way she had smiled at her throughout the summer. She didn't want to interrupt them, but she was standing close now and could hear their conversation. "I can only hope you are right, Bellatrix. Although the stars do speak in your favor. You being a teacher here, and Hermione Granger herself, coming to find you. Perhaps the world is coming to a change." Hermione felt her cheeks burn when she was called out. Both the centaur and Black looked at her. There was a smile on the woman's face which gradually disappeared the more the silence stretched. I'm sorry," Hermione said at last. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I can wait." "No need," said the centaur in his deep voice. "I will get to speak with Bellatrix many a time again. For you, Hermione Granger, the stars hesitate to say the same." "Way to lighten up the mood," Black snorted. Bane simply looked at her, blinking once slowly, before disappearing into the forest. Centaur's Black shook her head, fastening her cloak around her neck. Hermione noticed she was wearing a dress underneath, as usual. "I hope you have a good excuse for skipping Transfiguration, Granger. I can catch up." "That's not an excuse. You know all about following the rules, don't you, Professor Black?" She had been so sure this would gauge some reaction out of the woman, but Black simply walked past her and headed up to the castle. Hermione ran after her. "So, you decided you don't need me to patrol anymore?" "Last time only proved that," Black said shortly. "I will never understand you," Hermione sighed. "Understand me? You say that now, but when we were together, then you were apologizing," Hermione elaborated. "I thought you wanted me to apologize," Black retorted defensively. "There you go again. I thought you apologized because you wanted to." "Listen, Granger," Black turned to face her fully. "Last time you thought you knew me didn't work out so well for you. Keep your distance." Hermione watched her stride away once again, left alone in the cold. She wouldn't fall for Black's bad Death Eater act this time, however. When she joined Harry, Ron, and Ginny for lunch an hour later, the three of them exchanged incredulous looks. "Hermione," Harry began, "are you all right?" "Of course, why wouldn't I be?" "You mean you skipped Transfiguration on purpose?" Ron gawked. "Had to check something out?" When she didn't elaborate, the others dropped the topic, and soon conversation began again about their homework. Hermione took advantage of their conversation and discreetly opened Harry's bag with her wand. There it lay on top of all his textbooks. Hermione was glad she knew her best friend so well. She slipped it out without anyone noticing and zipped Harry's bag closed. Hermione finished lunch and swung her bag over her shoulder. "Where are you going?" Ginny narrowed her eyes. "I just have to send a letter." Hermione waved a hand. "See you in Dada." She rushed out of the Great Hall, glancing at the high table as she did so. Black's seat was vacant. How convenient. Hermione maneuvered around suits of armor and through tapestries until she finally came out 2 corridors away from the room of requirement. Standing in front of it, she checked the Marauder's map to make sure she was right. Black's stuff was nowhere to be seen. Hermione erased the map and put it away. She then took out a piece of parchment and scribbled a few words on it. The message disappeared with a flick of her wand. She left the blank piece of parchment on the ground in front of the room of requirement. When her friends asked her why she was out of breath when she came into class just before Lupin, Hermione dismissed them with a simple smile. Chapter 16. Bellatrix was anxiously waiting for Andromeda to join them. She had been mending bridges with both her sisters whole summer long. Narcissa came around easily, but Andromeda's character, so much like hers, made it near impossible for the two of them to talk in the beginning without a duel breaking out. Now, they had some progress to congratulate each other on. Since the start of the school year, Bellatrix and her sisters had been meeting up for dinner once a week. Black Manor, their childhood home, made for a very comfortable setting. It was neutral ground, and it held dear memories from back when they all got along. Narcissa, who was finishing with setting the table, sighed in exasperation and tried to get her to sit once again. "Andromeda is going to come like she is every time for the past 2 months. Could you please just sit down instead of pacing around? You can have a glass of fire whiskey if it will make you stop worrying. I'm worried what will happen after she comes, Bellatrix replied. It's been 3 weeks since your last duel. If we don't count Andromeda's stinging hex from last week, which you absolutely deserved, Narcissa added sternly. I tried to relate to her. She should be angry with you. Your husband's still alive. Hopefully he won't be my husband much longer. Hopefully he won't be alive much longer, Bellatrix murmured. You are an awful person. There's something you hear about Bella every day. Both women turned to the doorway. Their sister stood there, a bottle of fire whiskey in hand. Figured I'd take a shot each time I want to curse Bella, she nodded towards the bottle. If you want to join in, get your own alcohol. Everyone is fine. Can we sit down and eat now? Narcissa asked. When all 3 of them had settled down, Bellatrix called her house elf, Tilly. You call Mistress Bella. Mistresses Andromeda and Narcissa are here again. Tilly is glad to see you all here at the table again. Tilly, could you please just bring out the food? Bellatrix asked. Of course, mistress. Do try not to break anything this time, please. Tilly rather likes the crystal goblets. You're letting a house elf speak to you like that? Maybe you actually have change, Andromeda said. Furthermore, a letter from McGonagall came yesterday. Narcissa took the time to thank Tilly for bringing the food. You haven't shown up for any meals in over a week, Bella. Bad Bella, Andromeda smirked, helping herself to mashed potatoes and roast lamb. I'm sorry. I thought we were reconnecting, Bellatrix huffed. What is this, the emergency Bellatrix hotline now? The sad part is we do have to establish one, Andromeda quipped. Bellatrix opened the fire whiskey bottle her sister had brought and took a large swig. We are simply worried and wish to help, Bella, Narcissa spoke in a level tone. I'm fine. How's little Teddy? Andromeda snatched the bottle from her hands and took a gulp too, but she answered amicably. For the time being, Bellatrix was content to watch her sisters speak of their children. She was proud of them for raising her niece and nephew. Even if Nymphadora had a funny name and was a bit strange, and Draco acted a bit spoiled at times, it was Andromeda who had to ruin the moment. I don't know about McGonagall, but Remus tells me interesting things. The phase of the moon each day? Bellatrix snickered. Andromeda downed another glass of fire whiskey before answering. That he saw you talking with Hermione Granger outside last week. Hermione Granger is willing to talk to you? Narcissa stiffened. Surprises me as much as it does you. Bellatrix avoided either of her sister's gazes. Then I suppose the note Sissy found in one of your dress pockets would mean nothing to you, Andromeda said, waving a piece of parchment in front of her face. Bellatrix tried to catch it, but her sister snatched it away. Let's see. Bellatrix glared at Narcissa. The blonde had the grace to look ashamed. Andromeda cleared her throat. I know you are up to something. Your apology was sincere. I just wish you would be this forthcoming all the time, so it would actually make sense to trust you. Bellatrix took the fire whiskey bottle and poured herself another glass. She swirled its contents around, praying one of them would speak. Her sisters were watching her closely, however, and seemed content in the silence. Okay, fine. Granger is trying to play the hero again and thinks of me as a charity case. Big deal. Andromeda laughed, and Narcissa shook her head. Hermione Granger is not stupid, and neither are we, Andromeda said. If she thinks you're up to something, you most definitely are, and it couldn't hurt to tell us this time, Narcissa added pointedly. Bellatrix rolled her eyes. Excuse me for making sure you stayed alive throughout both wars. We're big girls, you know. Had to grow up fast when our big sister left us to go flaunting pure-blood supremacy nonsense. Andromeda dash. She's right, Sissy. Bellatrix finally met Andromeda's eyes. People always used to tell them how much alike they were. In truth, Bellatrix and Andromeda couldn't be more different. I do things my way. If we're going to be talking again and being one big family, Bellatrix mock shuddered, you're going to have to get used to that. Andromeda held her gaze for a few moments before grudgingly looking down at her plate and continuing her dinner. So, Sissy, has Draco asked out the Greengrass girl yet? Dinner continued well into the night, this time with the 3 of them taking a tour around the old manor and reminiscing about their life here. Bellatrix was even a bit sad to send her sisters home, but she had to remind herself they couldn't get back the time they'd lost. Closing the door of the manor, Bellatrix went to clean up the table from dinner. How many times does Tilly has to tell you she doesn't need help, mistress? I don't need help either, Bellatrix muttered. You go to bed, Mistress Bella. Tilly took the plates from her hands. Bellatrix considered staying, but nothing ever came out of arguing with that house elf. See you tomorrow, I suppose. Good night, Tilly. Good night, Mistress Black. The next day found Bellatrix up at the crack of dawn, even if she had been up quite late last night. Since it was a Sunday, and she didn't specifically need to be at Hogwarts, Bellatrix decided she could spend some time as she saw fit. And there was something she had been avoiding doing ever since her sentence had been carried out. Dressing in her usual black corset dress and black cloak, Bellatrix instructed Tilly not to wait for her to come back, then made her way out of the manor. She had considered walking a bit before operating, but this would only give her time to back out once again. Making up her mind, Bellatrix took out her wand, twirled on the spot, and disapparated silently. She had never particularly liked St. Mungo's and was thankful that the few times she had been sick as a child her parents had called a doctor to the manor. Going in through the visitor's entrance, Bellatrix made sure to keep her hood low over her head. She didn't stay in line for information. She knew where she was going. Up a few flights of stairs, rounding a few corners, and here she was in the pristine white of the Janus Thicky Ward corridor. Bellatrix walked slowly towards the white door ahead, knowing that she stuck out in her black clothing. Thankfully, there were no nurses around, and she managed to slip inside the ward for spell damage undetected. She had been here before. The curtains in front of each bed didn't bother her. The plants at the windows and the photos and calendars on the walls didn't surprise her. It was common knowledge that once you found yourself in this ward, it was near impossible to get out. She maneuvered around beds until she reached the last beds in the row. They were put next to each other, and a large curtain kept their privacy. Bellatrix raised a hand and kept it hovering in front of the curtain for a second. With a sigh, she pulled it aside, just enough to peek. There they were. Frank was lying flat on his back, his hands at his sides, staring blankly up at the ceiling. Alice was on the bed next to him in the same pose. She blinked more often than him. Her mouth opened and closed from time to time. Bellatrix let herself in as quietly as possible, even if she knew they wouldn't notice her anyway. She simply stood there as the minutes ticked by, aware a healer could come into the ward at any given moment. Still, she felt she deserved to stay here and watch them. Watch what she had done. She even deserved to be caught and thrown out of here, but she knew this would only cause trouble to the Longbottom son, and the boy had been through enough because of her already. She couldn't understand how he passed her in the corridors and had the strength to smile at her. She held no love for her own parents, but she could only imagine what she would do if it were. Andromeda and Narcissa in the beds in front of her. Bellatrix felt something wet roll down her cheek. "Damn it," she whispered fiercely, smacking at her face to get rid of the tears. A sound came from Alice's bed. Bellatrix gasped, then berated herself for acting this way. She watched as Alice turned her head this way, and that before focusing her eyes on a spot on the curtains on Bellatrix's left. Alice lifted her hand as if to catch something in the air, then let it fall on the bed next to her. Bellatrix bowed her head. She heard another thump as Alice's hand hit the bed again. And again. And again. Bellatrix looked at her again. Alice's gaze hadn't moved from the curtain. Only her hand raised up and then fell down onto the bed. Bellatrix looked at Frank. He was oblivious to his surroundings. Tentatively, Bellatrix walked over and sat down on Alice's bed, as far away from her as possible. Alice's hand stopped its up and down motion. Bellatrix waited for her to do something else, point her in another direction, but Alice simply stared at the curtain behind her. Bellatrix shook her head at her wishful thinking. Alice was probably doing that every now and then, and no one had noticed. "You have no idea what's happening around you, do you?" she asked. "That's a shame. Your son grew up to be as skilled as you once were. His wand work can use some polishing, but in herbology, he's as good as you once were, Alice." Bellatrix didn't know why she talked. She simply began and kept on talking. "The teachers in school wouldn't shut up about your gift when we were kids. Now Neville is Sprout's champion. He works hard to make Augusta proud. And you and Frank, too. I wish I could help you, Alice. I've been trying, you know. Apologies would mean nothing to you. So I've been trying to find a way for you to get out of here. Failure after failure. I can't even figure out medicine for a cursed scar, let alone reverse what I did to you and Frank." Alice hadn't moved. "For what it's worth, I do feel sorry for what happened," Bellatrix muttered. If it could be me there instead of all my victims dash. She was cut off by Alice getting up suddenly. Bellatrix stared at the woman who swayed slightly on the spot. Should she let her wander around? Alice wasn't waiting around for her to decide. Albeit on shaky legs, the woman walked past the curtains with determination and crossed the distance to the other side of the ward. Bellatrix saw her staring into a fish tank she hadn't previously noticed. Alice lifted her hand and tapped it on the tank. Bellatrix sighed and walked over. Nice fish, I suppose, but you should be in bed. She tried, gently guiding Alice back to her bed. The woman stood her ground. Her fingers tapped on the tank again. Bellatrix glanced at it again. Some colorful fish swam inside. And on the bottom, laying low nearly out of sight, was a slimy creature with tentacles which Bellatrix recognized. Murtlap. They were probably using it for essence for people with injuries. As she stared at it along with Alice, the gears in Bellatrix's mind turned. Murtlap essence for injuries against pain and to prevent scarring. Merlin, how didn't I think of it? She turned to see Alice trudging back to her bed. Bellatrix glanced at the Murtlap one last time, then followed. When she walked over, Alice had already laid down and had resumed her previous pose. Bellatrix didn't stay to wonder if the woman could comprehend what she was doing. She paused before leaving only long enough to take a silent vow that she would return the favor to Alice. Chapter 17. Hermione didn't receive a reply for over 3 weeks. During that time, Black was also absent from meals and the castle overall, it seemed, as Hermione and her friends only glimpsed her outside with students. One afternoon, however, Hermione was returning some books at the library when a small paper bird flew in her aisle and bumped into her shoulder. It hovered in the air in front of Hermione. She took it and unfolded it carefully. The Great Hall, Friday, 9 o'clock. Don't be late. It wasn't signed, yet Hermione knew exactly who it was from. The thought of seeing Black in 4 days made her surprisingly giddy. So much so that Professor Flitwick suspected Ginny had confused the tongue-tying charm they were supposed to be practicing with the cheering charm. On Wednesday, Professor McGonagall didn't miss the opportunity to ask her about Friday. So, Professor Black told me you will resume helping her with Friday night patrols. I wouldn't want to hide away from my head girl duties, Hermione answered casually. Did Professor Black finally manage to put your mind at ease? Hermione knew Professor McGonagall only wanted to help her. I think we have learned how to coexist peacefully, Hermione said carefully. That in itself is a big win. McGonagall patted her shoulder. Then they continued their patrol in silence. When Friday finally came, Hermione could barely wait for the clock to strike 9 in the evening. At 8:30, she practically flew out of the common room, ignoring her friends and the fat lady's calls. She was down in the Great Hall in record time and was only slightly disappointed Black wasn't already there. It felt strange to wait for her as all the previous times it had been the older witch who waited for Hermione. The minutes ticked by slowly as Hermione walked around looking at the newly reconstructed walls. She tried hard not to imagine the state of the Great Hall in the aftermath of the war. Everyone had worked hard, however, and had restored it to its former glory. You're here. Hermione jumped at how close the voice was. Turning around, she saw Black had entered the hall and was standing near the high table. Professor Black, Hermione greeted. You didn't think I'd ignore my head girl duties, did you? Black shrugged. Didn't really think you'd show up. That's why I didn't tell you why I wanted you to come here. Hermione felt her blood run cold despite how long she'd been waiting to see the other woman. Had she misjudged Black's character yet again? I don't want you to panic, the other woman hurried to say. I only want to give you something. You don't even have to stay for patrol. Under Hermione's guarded gaze, Black rummaged inside her dress pocket and pulled out a small glass jar. It seemed to contain some kind of ointment. Bellatrix extended her arm and came closer so she could hand it over. It smells disgusting, and it leaves color traces on the skin that are hard to wash away. But it works, the witch said, emphasizing the last bit proudly. Hermione opened the jar. The substance did have a nasty smell, and the yellow-green color wasn't particularly inviting. But, is this dash for your arm? Yes, Black nodded. Rub some of it into the skin once every day, and it should be good in a few months. Hermione was shocked and almost missed the other woman slipping quietly out of the hall. Black, wait. Hermione caught up to her on the marble staircase. I don't really expect a thanks, Granger. Well, I wanted to say it anyway. They walked in silence for a while. Hermione could sense the awkwardness. I just have to ask, Black. Then I'll leave you alone. How dash. Bellatrix. Pardon? I'm not a big fan of my last name. Use the first if you don't mind, the witch grumbled. Bellatrix, Hermione said slowly. Warrior. It suits you. When she realized Bellatrix wasn't going to answer, Hermione continued. I only wanted to ask you how you found this. I've been looking into cursed wounds medicine, but didn't find much. I made it myself. Really? The younger woman regretted her surprised tone. Contrary to popular belief, Granger, I'm not stupid. Hermione, you might as well use my first name too. And I don't think you're stupid. It's just really complicated to make medicine on your own. I managed, Bellatrix shrugged. I had some help, and besides, I had decent marks in my time in Hogwarts. Bellatrix Black, a bookworm? Hermione joked. Mostly. Believe it or not, running around to brag about my pure blood wasn't a hobby until my OWLS. Then you had a sudden change of heart. Then I took the dark mark. Bellatrix always said these things so indifferently, as if she had resolved to not feel anything about them. And you couldn't focus that well in school. Voldemort's plans about Hogwarts got one to think they wouldn't need an education. Regardless, I would have been happy to graduate with top marks. My parents, however, were only interested in how I portray myself now that I was his follower. That's why McGonagall offered me the post of care for magical creatures professor. Only class I managed to stay top at until my NEWTS. You're good at the job though, Hermione said. Getting a centaur to meet the students was pretty awesome. Bane's an old friend. You don't like taking credit for your actions, do you? You think I deserve credit? Bellatrix asked. Some. Don't let it get to your head, Hermione smirked. Bellatrix let out a short laugh. It reminded Hermione of all the laughs they had shared during the summer. You'll keep tagging along then? Bellatrix asked. I know it annoys you so much, Hermione quipped. Chapter 18. Before she knew it, Hermione found herself being invited to the Burrow for Christmas. The Weasleys were throwing a large Christmas dinner, and as far as Hermione knew, besides her and Harry, Andromeda had been invited, along with Lupin, Tonks, and Teddy, Draco, and Narcissa too, and most surprisingly, Bellatrix. The witch herself told her as much on the last Friday before Christmas. We'll be seeing each other over the holidays then, Hermione rolled her eyes mockingly. An unpleasant prospect. Almost as terrifying as the fact I'm supposed to face a family who lost their son thanks to me. Hermione nudged Bellatrix with a shoulder. They invited you for a reason. They're trying to overcome the war just as hard as you are. Morgana sagged tits. The one time I need you to be a brat and make a scene so I don't have to come your supportive? Oh, you're not getting away that easily, Hermione grinned evilly. Story of my life. What do I even bring as a gift? Your presence will be enough, I'm sure. Such a ray of sunshine to be around. Hermione dodged the stinging jinx directed her way. The next morning when the train set off for King's Cross, Hermione, Ron, Harry, and Ginny found an empty compartment near the back. Ah, good old train ride back home. Flitwick was starting to get on my nerves, Ginny sighed dramatically. You've got NEWTS coming up, Gin. Getting on your nerves is what every teacher should be doing, Hermione said. Oh, shut up. You have those too, and I'm done with my first round of revision already. How do you do that? Ron was dumbfounded. Between hanging out with us and patrols with the teachers too, Ginny added. Which reminds me, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley invited Black over for Christmas? Harry turned to the redheads. Don't look at us. We're surprised too. Maybe they didn't want to leave her out? Harry and Ginny stared at Ron like he'd grown a second head. But Hermione was proud of him for being considerate. With both of her sisters invited and everything, he trailed off uncertainly. Which is thoughtful, Hermione encouraged him. He smiled. Besides it though, I don't know how the Burrow will fit that many people, Ginny mused. It won't have to. I spoke to Mrs. Weasley to have the dinner in Grimmauld Place, Harry said. Didn't she tell you? She mentioned some change of plans. If you two didn't know, do the other guests know? Hermione asked. Maybe we should write letters, Dash. I'm sure Mum did, Ron interrupted her. She was probably going to tell us when we came home. Who are you so desperate to see there? Ginny narrowed her eyes. No one, Hermione said, her voice coming out rather squeaky. Aha! As the boys began to talk about Quidditch, Ginny tried grilling Hermione about Christmas again. You know Draco likes Astoria, right? Of course I do. They're both so obvious. And Lupin's taken Bill too. Charlie's, well, Charlie and George dash. I know there are no eligible bachelors invited to dinner, Jen. Don't start with Harry and Ron now. So why are you acting funny? I'm not. R2. The banter carried them all the way through the train ride, and they were hesitant to say goodbye at King's Cross. You will see each other in 3 days. Mrs. Weasley burst out exasperatedly. We should go before your father tries to talk up another muggle. But, Molly, look at the curious earplugs so many of them are wearing. Maybe they have something like the Mandrake. Arthur, go start the car. Ronald, Ginny, let's go, Mrs. Weasley said fiercely. Then she added in a softer tone, Harry, Hermione, if you need anything before Christmas, don't hesitate to ask. We'll be fine, Mrs. Weasley, Hermione smiled. Let's go, she tugged at Harry's hand, seeing he was about to say something else to Ron. Oh yes, bye, Mrs. Weasley, see you soon. Hermione and Harry watched the new car Mr. Weasley was given by the Ministry disappear into traffic. Shall we? Harry offered her his hand, and she took it, allowing him to lead her to a secluded alley from where both of them operated in front of Grimmauld Place. You want to watch a movie tonight? Harry whispered as they walked inside. Great idea. I'll clean some rooms for Christmas. I'll make dinner and set up the laptop. Hermione gave him thumbs up and climbed up the stairs quietly. She loved their Muggle-style nights. In a way, it made Hermione feel more connected to her parents, and she was grateful Harry took the time to do magic-free activities with her every now and then. Her good mood persisted for the remainder of the evening, even if her and Harry accidentally set off Walburga Black's portrait with their loud laughter. Hermione was pleasantly surprised to find Bellatrix's medicine worked, and her arm prickled only barely at the portrait's insults. Chapter 19. Chapter Notes. 2 chapters today. I'm spoiling you face with tears of joy and joy. Christmas rolled around quickly, and Hermione was thankful she had done gift shopping earlier. She only had to try to find one last present on Christmas Eve, but thankfully most of the shops in Diagon Alley were open. The Weasleys came early on Christmas morning, so Molly could start with dinner. Harry had tried to assure her he and Hermione could handle some of the cooking. Good thing no one had believed him, since Hermione had to wake him up when the Weasleys came and cover for him until he got dressed. Morning, Harry dear, Mrs. Weasley chuckled when she saw him yawn when he entered the kitchen. Morning, Mrs. Weasley, he replied sheepishly. Do you need some help, Mrs. Weasley? Hermione asked politely while washing up from breakfast. No, thank you, dear. And how many times have I told you to call me Molly? Hermione and Harry mumbled apologies, both of them knowing they wouldn't start doing that anytime soon. Bill, Fleur, and Charlie arrived shortly after lunch, which meant they could finally open presents. Hermione relished in all the new books she got and was happy her friends liked what she had picked out for them. Mrs. Weasley walked around and gave everyone their Christmas sweater, breaking down when Fleur opened hers. Mr. Weasley stood up and walked over to hug her, then raised a toast to the war and its victims. Everyone drank, and soon George managed to liven up the atmosphere with a few jokes, claiming it would have been what Fred wanted. No, Weasley's Wizard Wheez's shop owner wants a sappy Christmas. George called and released a couple of fireworks which fizzed around, banging into the ceiling, walls, and furniture, and exploding in different colors. Even Mrs. Weasley cracked a smile. Hermione soon found herself immersed in conversation with Fleur and Ginny since Harry, Ron, and Bill walked off to play wizard chess. So, girls, how's the last year in school going? Fleur's accent was almost completely gone after nearly 2 years of lessons from Bill. It's hell. Don't trust Hermione. She is always like school, Ginny threw her a dirty look. Ouch, Hermione gasped mockingly. It's exciting and sad at once. I can't wait to do so many things in life, but I'll also miss Hogwarts. I sometimes miss Buxbaden's too, Fleur admitted. In France, but Bill has promised to take me there on vacation soon. Speaking of, I hear Harry might be my brother-in-law one day. We are together, yes, Ginny said slightly defensively. Hermione knew how jealous her friend had been of Fleur and her little sister in 4th year. Wonderful. That just leaves Hermione then, Fleur clapped her hands. Why are you and Ronald not all over each other anymore? We're just friends, Hermione laughed awkwardly. Kissing around the Chamber of Secrets while some of us were fighting for Hogwarts, Ginny said. Ooh, kissing? It was nothing. Well, it was something that turned out to be nothing. We're just friends now. Fleur and Ginny looked at her expectantly until she began to blush under the pressure. Thankfully, Mrs. Weasley asked for some help, and Hermione practically flew out of her seat at the table. coming. We could still try to bring her into the family with Charlie, she heard Fleur say to Ginny. Meddling Vilas and best friends, Hermione muttered under her breath. The guests began to arrive just as Mr. Weasley noticed Harry's laptop on top of a cupboard. Arthur, go help Remus with Teddy's things, Mrs. Weasley said firmly. Then, when her husband was out of sight, she whispered, Hermione, please get this muggle device out of here. Hermione banished it to Harry's room and smiled at Mrs. Weasley. Surprisingly, no yells could be heard from the portrait in the hallway. Tonks had managed to get in unusually quietly. Teddy cried out the next minute, however, and Lupin and Mr. Weasley rushed to close the curtains while Tonks ran inside the kitchen with a now laughing Teddy in her arms. I swear, it's like he knows what he's doing. Tonks glared at her son. He's a little troublemaker, Ginny cooed at the baby. I don't know what you expect with parents like his. Tonks handed her the baby and went to ask Mrs. Weasley if she could help. No, dear, everything is in the oven, you rest. Let me see little Teddy now. Ginny seemed all too happy to give him to her mother. Hermione took the initiative to set the table before Tonks could try to help with that. Suddenly, a Patronus in the form of a winged horse flew inside the kitchen. Whoa, whose is that? It's beautiful. Hermione also wondered about the elegant Pegasus. She would have thought Fleur, but the woman was sitting at the table admiring it. We are in front of the house. Nymphadora told us not to knock or ring the bell. As everyone recognized Andy Tonks' voice, the room fell silent. It wasn't hard to guess who was the wee Andy was talking about. I'll go open the door, Tonks said hurriedly. Remind my mother I don't like the name she chose for me, she added bitterly. The silence persisted as they all heard Tonks whisper with a few people in the corridor. Hermione hoped this would go well. Footsteps were coming closer now. Tonks entered the kitchen first. Her mother was behind her. Then Draco. Ow! The boy had banged his head on the low door frame. Your mother told you to be quiet, boy. Same goes for you, Bella. Lupin was already on his feet, ready to go and deal with the portrait again, when Bellatrix, Narcissa. No one had heard Sirius's mother sound so happy before. Said women paled. Have you come to see me? To save me, Aunt Walburga? Narcissa looked behind her uncertainly. Has she cursed the house? Bellatrix mused. Wouldn't put it past her, Andromeda whispered. It's a portrait, Harry explained. There they are. Walburga's angry voice bellowed. A whole lot of blood traitors and mudbloods come to besmirch the house of my fathers, the most noble and ancient house of Black. Hermione saw Bellatrix's eyes dart over to her. Then the woman walked back out into the hallway. Her sisters followed her, and curiosity won over everyone else too. Walburga seemed to be enjoying the attention. Look at them all, the filthy scum. They dare walk these rooms as if it's their birthright. But you will throw them out, won't you? You have always upheld this family's values. Not you, she spat at Andromeda. All three sisters were looking at her in disgust. She was never pretty. Why commemorate this with a portrait? Bellatrix, you're so powerful. Exile those sorry excuses for wizards. And Narcissa, you will help, won't you? You who have the prettiest name dash. Narcissa slashed her wand through the air, and Walburga's voice disappeared. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. You all mean to tell me Sirius lived here and endured that any time the curtains opened? Andromeda looked at Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. We all try to get rid of it, Mrs. Weasley explained. Permanent sticking charm. I would have burned the house down in Sirius's place, Andromeda said. Has anyone tried setting the portrait on fire? Bellatrix asked. What is it with you two and fire? Narcissa huffed. I can try something. It might work, but I'll have to use my wand. Bellatrix looked around them all for objections. Her gaze lingered on Hermione for a second longer. You think it will work? Lupin asked. Only one way to find out. The witch pulled out her wand. Hermione noticed Bill and Charlie flexing their fingers, but no one said anything. Exilium omni malum, Bellatrix said in a low voice, swishing her wand in the air in a complicated figure. Walburga's portrait shook. The painted woman's eyes widened before the frame detached itself from the wall, and the portrait fell face down onto the floor. Guess it works. Did you devise it? Andromeda asked. Father taught me. He taught you a spell to exile all evil. Narcissa raised an eyebrow. Knowing his wife, can you blame him? The three of them shared a short laugh. Then Bellatrix turned to Mrs. Weasley. I say we leave her there, so she can't disturb the celebrations. Also, I have something for you if you don't mind. Bellatrix took something out of her pocket and enlarged it with her wand. It was a set of silver cutlery beautifully wrapped with a scarlet ribbon. You didn't have to. Mrs. Weasley accepted it carefully. Thank you. So, shall we finally get to the kitchen? Oh, what a relief to speak normally in this corridor. Lead the way, Molly Andromeda said. And if there are any more portraits of our aunt, let us open the wine Sissy brought first. One does not deal with Walburga sober. Chapter 20. Chapter notes. 3 whole chapters today. If that's not a Christmas miracle, I don't know what is faced with tears of joy. Honestly, though, it's either that or I'm ghosting you for 3 to 30 business days. Kidding. I hope I keep up my regular writing schedule. Enjoy this chapter in any case, and stay tuned for more. Dinner was a success in Hermione's eyes, seeing as Narcissa had brought really good wine which loosened everybody up. Mrs. Weasley's delicious cooking also helped since it got her countless compliments. Even Narcissa's cold demeanor melted away when she tried the stuffed beacon rolls. Oh, that is delicious, Molly. You have to give me the recipe. Ha, Sissy, please don't get anyone under the impression that you cook, Andromeda sniggered. I sometimes do. Yes, and Bella sometimes follows the rules. Boy, I was a good prisoner all summer long, asked Granger. You tried to hit me with a stinging jinx the other day. Hermione fired at Bellatrix, who was sitting opposite her. The other day, it wasn't summer. Oh, you think Bella's stinging jinxes are bad? Try Dromeda's. She used to chase all of us around this very room, so she could practice them on us. It was the first bit of magic she learned how to do, without a wand yet. Tonks was looking at her aunt in awe, then turned to her mother. Really, Mum? And you were angry I levitated things around the house. You levitated the fridge over your head. Did you spend a lot of time here with Sirius and his brother? Harry asked while distributing glasses of eggnog around. Everyone around the table sobered up slightly. Yes, Andromeda answered. Our parents didn't like a lot of children around, so we mostly spent time together here. Not that Walburga and Orion were fans of children yelling, but this way they could neglect Siri and Reg without guilt because they knew Bella would take care of all of us. Charming family, Lupin joked drily. Trust me, the last thing we wanted was our parents' attention, Bellatrix chuckled. That's sad, Hermione said. Classic only child response, Bellatrix retaliated. Hermione threw a peanut at her. Sirius never mentioned you were close, Tonks said. Sirius hated me, and Bella, Narcissa told her. But he must have spoken about your mother. He liked to point out how the two of them were blasted off the family tree, Arthur said. That's still here? Bellatrix asked. 3rd floor, the room opposite the stairs. Mum made us clean the carpet there 3 times, George grumbled. Hermione had noticed he had been quiet throughout dinner. Because you were only pretending to clean, Mrs. Weasley said. There might or might not be a spell I might or might not teach you that creates an illusion for cleanliness. George grinned uncertainly at Bellatrix. Spoiling other people's children is not a hobby, Bella Narcissa scolded her. Your husband spoiled your son. I will not take the blame for Lucius's inadequacy. Speaking of, I heard you're getting a divorce from him, Narcissa. Hermione wasn't surprised, but it did catch her off guard to hear from Mrs. Weasley. If she had not anticipated anyone to know, Narcissa did not show it. Yes, I hope it will be a quick one too. With his house, Arrest Malfoy Manor is unpleasant to stay at. If you need a place to stay, this house has way too many rooms, Harry threw in. Thank you, Mr. Potter, but I will make do with one of my sisters. But none of us has offered. So you can have her, Harry, Andy said. How come you offer everyone to come stay here but me? Ginny frowned at her boyfriend. Harry looked between Mr. and Mrs. Weasley quickly. Now, Ginevra, you have your own room at home. What more do you want? Her mother said sternly. Less boys, Ginny muttered. Hey, Gin, Percy moved out and I will too soon. Who's going to keep Ickle Ronikin's company? George clapped her on the back. See, Mother, everyone's moving out. Draco trailed off when Narcissa threw him a look. Be like your aunt and uncle, Draco. Move out without telling her, Andy winked at him. I will blast him off the family tree myself, Narcissa warned. Merlin forbid I go study abroad after Hogwarts. Did your dad really want you to study in Durmstrang? Ron asked. Did you 3 use Polyjuice again? Draco laughed. We heard a rumor in 4th year, Hermione said quickly. So Dash, did he say again? Mrs. Weasley looked between her, Ron, and Harry. You kids use Polyjuice potion in school? Tonks asked. How'd you get your hands on it? We brewed it, Ron shrugged. Hermione did, Harry corrected him. Thanks, Hermione scowled at them both. You brewed polyjuice potion in school, but you can't learn occlumency? I wouldn't have to learn it if you stayed out of my head. Black Hermione fired. You think too loud, Granger. Hermione traded the occasional snide comment with Bellatrix, while the conversation between the others jumped from topic to topic. Soon Harry, Ron, and Draco excused themselves to go play with the brand new chess set Harry had bought Ron for Christmas. Charlie had managed to drag Lupin into a discussion about dragons, and Tonks was rocking Teddy to sleep. Bill and Percy decided to arm wrestle, much to Fleur's displeasure that her husband wasn't paying attention to her. "Excuse me a second." Bellatrix stood up and began making her way out of the room. "Do you need directions to somewhere?" Hermione smirked. "I think I remember my way around here. I spent some of my childhood here. Or did you not pay attention to conversation earlier?" Bellatrix turned to smirk at her too. "Still, that was so long ago." "Oh, haha, I'm not that older than those two." Bellatrix motioned at her sisters, then stomped away. Andromeda and Narcissa shared a smile, then looked at Hermione. "You've come from knocking her out to jabbing at her about her age? They should call you the bravest witch of your age. You should mention that to Rita Skeeter." Hermione grinned. Next to her, Fleur chuckled. "What is it?" Hermione turned to her quizzically. "I figured why Ronald is just your friend," Fleur said cryptically. "What? I better say nothing." "You will see. I hope." Hermione looked at Fleur blankly, but the woman kept her silence. Giving up, Hermione stood up. "Anyways, I have to go to my room for something. Be down in a bit." She smiled at Mrs. Weasley and made her way out of the kitchen. Outside, she waited in the corridor, looking at the back of Walburga's portrait. "Do you miss her?" Bellatrix's voice came from the stairs. "It's going to take some getting used to not hearing her lovely voice." "Did your scar hurt when she dashed?" "No." Hermione cut her off. "Can you come with me for a second? I want to show you something." She didn't wait for an answer, knowing the woman would follow her. "I've seen the rooms in this house, but all right," Bellatrix said, after Hermione invited her into her and Ginny's room. "I'll change my mind about this," the younger woman warned. She was a bit nervous since she didn't know whether Bellatrix would like her surprise. She took out the small gift she had wrapped for her anyway. "I don't really know if you like gifts, but I got this for you," she said sheepishly, handing the present to Bellatrix. The woman stared at it. "You got me a gift?" "Yes. And it's safe to open. I promise it won't explode." Bellatrix smiled slightly and tore the wrapping paper carefully. Hermione watched her as she gasped at the small glass model of the Orion constellation she held. All the stars twinkled, but one shined brighter than the others. "I know you don't like your last name," Hermione said, "but your first one is beautiful, and so is the star you're named after." "Thank you," Bellatrix whispered, still staring at the present. "I also have something for you, but dash. You waited to make sure I would give you a gift too?" Bellatrix scowled at her. "No, but someone downstairs may have thought I was trying to curse you." "Hey, come on, dinner went well." "Yes, well." Bellatrix took out another small package from her pocket and returned it to its original size. "Merry Christmas." "Thank you." Hermione was quick to unwrap what she already guessed was a book. "House elves, enslaved or employed through the ages." Hermione gasped. "I didn't know there were books on the topic." "The Hogwarts library barely had any." "That's from Black Manor's library," Bellatrix explained. "It may contain a chapter on the Black family house elves, but you can just skip it." "This is great, thank you. Thought you might find it interesting. And you deserve it anyways. You put up with me for a whole summer. Even if it was because you didn't trust me." The two of them shared a laugh, then made their way down the stairs. It turned out that everyone was preparing to leave, even the Weasleys, though Mrs. Weasley had asked several times whether she should stay to help them clean up. "Well, this was nice." Mrs. Weasley smiled at everyone. "Harry, Hermione, are you certain you don't need help cleaning up?" "We can stay back too," Andy offered. "We have it covered," Harry insisted. They said goodbye to everyone, and people began filing out of the door. Bellatrix walked over to Walburga's portrait and levitated it off the ground. "I'll get this out of your hair if you don't mind," she turned to Harry. "Not at all. Just don't leave it in a muggle bin. They don't like it when pictures talk to them." "No, I have a better idea where to put it." Hermione and Harry bid everyone good night and closed the front door. They turned to look at each other sheepishly. "Clean up tomorrow?" Hermione said. "I thought you'd never ask." They laughed loudly in the now Walburga-free house, then made their way up the stairs to their rooms. "Night!" Harry yelled up from the third floor. "Night!" Hermione yelled back, already opening her new book on house elves. Chapter 21. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Hermione finished the book that same evening, but opted to wait until tomorrow to send Bellatrix a letter. Harry had gathered the courage to buy another owl under the condition Hermione would help him take care of it. She knew how much her friend still missed Hedwig, so it had been easy to say yes. Plus, that meant she could use it too, and Hermione had always wanted to be able to send letters without asking to borrow someone's owl. And so the day after Christmas Fluis, the name was courtesy of Harry, but Hermione found it funny too, was tasked with delivering a short note to Bellatrix. Hermione had only written she had found the book enjoyable and thanked the woman for the present once again. She wasn't expecting an answer, yet the large brown owl returned the same evening while she was having dinner with Harry. I didn't know Fluis was out, Harry threw in as Hermione hastily unrolled the scroll tied to the owl's leg. I had to send a letter, she answered vaguely, smiling at the note's contents. Bellatrix had written how her parents' portraits were liking their new nightlight. You got an answer quickly. She placed the letter in her pocket and glared at Harry playfully. You're nosy today. Can you blame me? My best friend's acting funny. I am not. Don't think I didn't notice you and Black disappearing from dinner last night. We didn't disappear together. Hermione looked at her plate, trying to lie as smoothly as possible. And I'm a dancing hippogriff. Hermione looked away. I just want you to remember who she is, Harry added. It's your turn to remind me, huh? Hermione replied. It's ironic, Harry agreed. Thank you, Hermione said earnestly, closing the subject. She didn't stop exchanging letters with Bellatrix, however, thankful for the witch's quick replies so that Harry didn't notice their owl's absence. On New Year's Eve, Hermione was celebrating with the Weasleys at the Burrow. Bellatrix had told her in one of her letters that she would be spending the night with her sisters. Hermione had sent a note in the morning, instructing Fluis to come back promptly. She wasn't expecting an answer to a simple, "Have a great time tonight." While she watched the others get into the rather heated game of chess between Bill and Percy, Hermione felt someone drop into the seat next to her. She turned to look at Fleur, who was sporting a glass of wine. Hi, Hermione said nervously. The grace and beauty of the villa always made her feel inferior in a way. Hello, Hermione. Fleur's accent always thickened after a few glasses of alcohol, yet her composure never swayed. You're not into Z mood tonight? What do you mean? If I recall, you were smiling a lot more on Christmas. Hermione simply shrugged, to which Fleur giggled. You English are so slow sometimes. Fleur patted her shoulder. But you will get there. With that, the blonde stood up and walked over to cheer her husband on. Hermione contemplated joining them all and pretending she saw the game's appeal when she noticed a black bird land onto the windowsill. Hermione locked eyes with it. It was a raven. The raven stared at her for a few seconds before flying off upwards. Hermione checked to make sure no one had seen it. Everyone was focused on the game, while Mrs. Weasley was overseeing the cutlery wash itself. The young woman stood up and quickly made her way out of the kitchen. She ran upstairs into Ginny's room, and, just as she had predicted, the raven was perched onto the windowsill outside. Hermione opened the window to let it in and search the room for some owl treats. Surprisingly, the raven did eat the few she managed to find. Hermione noticed a scroll of parchment tied to its leg. The raven didn't move as she reached out to take it. As she unrolled it, Hermione recognized the neat cursive on the parchment. You try having a great night with two annoying sisters. Though I suppose Potter and Weasley are keeping you on your toes. The Hogwarts Express drops you off Friday evening, so I suppose I'll see you in the Great Hall at 9. You've had enough time away from me, I would say. Happy New Year, by the way. B. Strangely enough, Hermione agreed with Bellatrix. She'd come to miss their teasing exchanges, or even simply spending time with the other witch. She wondered how that could be possible with the history between them. No matter how easy the interactions between them became, that thought was always at the back of Hermione's mind, gnawing at her. She scribbled a quick response, nevertheless, knowing the other which put a lot of effort into being a good person now. Well, as good as Bellatrix could be, she supposed. The raven stretched its leg out so she could tie her response, then flew out of the open window. Hermione made her way downstairs, hoping no one had noticed her absence. She arrived just in time for Percy's win against Bill. The resulting thunderous cheers had Mrs. Weasley come and take the chess set away. Gather round, everyone, it's nearly time for the countdown. As everyone started counting down from 10, Hermione found Ron, George, Percy, and Charlie. Joining the No New Year's Kiss Club this year too? George grinned at her. The kiss at midnight is such a cliche. Hermione rolled her eyes. I'd prefer it if we looked the other way, because our sister doesn't seem to think so, Ron said. Hermione followed his gaze to where Ginny stood in Harry's embrace. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! Everyone called in unison. Then the room was full of kissing couples. Bet now is the time when you miss the dragons, Charlie George said. If I had one here, I'd let him have a go at you. Hermione's thoughts wandered far away from their conversation as she wondered whether Bellatrix would receive her note soon. The rest of the holidays passed by in a flash. Hermione and Harry met up with the Weasleys at King's Cross Station on Friday morning. Study hard, kids, Mr. Weasley told them before they boarded the train. All of you are finally graduating. Hogwarts is going to take a break after 8 years, Mrs. Weasley said. Do try not to get in trouble before your NEWTS. And don't worry if you don't score perfect marks on those. We are always recruiting, Charlie grinned. He had come to see them off before returning to Romania. Weasley's wizard wheezes are too, George winked. And people with safer and more stable jobs too, Mrs. Weasley snarked. Off you go now, before the train leaves without you. Hermione noticed Harry and Ron exchanging a look and shook her head. She doubted Mr. Weasley would have dared to dabble with his new car after the scandal in their second year. The four of them boarded the train at last and made their way into a compartment Neville and Luna had saved for them. Hey, how are the holidays? Neville greeted them as they sat down. Did you check your mistletoe for narvals? Luna asked seriously. I could swear I felt something coming with you all. They all laughed, never truly being able to tell whether Luna was joking or not, and Hermione felt that warm feeling in her chest she associated with home. Chapter and notes. I hope you like this chapter, and you're looking forward to the next one. Something wicked this way comes eyes. Chapter 22. Chapter notes. Ahem, without spoiling anything before you've read the chapter. That's one of those chapters I put a warning in the tags for. So, teen and up audiences only enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Hermione saw Bellatrix the moment they entered the Great Hall for dinner. She was talking to Professor McGonagall. Then, as she made her way to her own seat on the high table, Bellatrix looked her way and their eyes met. There was no smile on the other woman's face, but Hermione was used to that. The knot in her chest tightened uncomfortably. She had spent a considerable amount of the journey here thinking about approaching the forbidden subject between them. Hermione played different scenarios in her head, the worst being Bellatrix going feral. She had berated herself for thinking that almost immediately. The other would surely wouldn't take it well, but this conversation was one they were bound to have at some point. Still not certain they had reached this point, Hermione hardly paid attention to the headmistress's welcome back speech. In fact, she barely participated in conversation too, until Ron noticed her mood. You all right, Mione? He asked. Oh, yes, she snapped out of her reverie. A bit tired, but I'll manage. You have patrol after dinner, Ginny remarked. Unless you ask your pal to free you of it tonight. She wouldn't mind. Hermione scowled. Strange. I remember a time when I used to be this suspicious, and you all were thinking I'm being paranoid, and that she's good. You vouching for Black is just unsettling, Harry said slowly. Hermione's a good judge of character, though, Ron joined in. If she thinks she's safe, we should support her. Ron had grown mentally as well as physically over the course of the year, and Hermione was incredibly proud of him. Thanks, Ron. No problem, but do be careful with her. This evening her friends let her go rather reluctantly, and Hermione wondered whether her hesitation was showing. Still, she bid them good night and told them not to wait for her, then made her way out of the common room. She had waited until the last minute to leave, so when she stepped inside the Great Hall, it was a few minutes past 9. There you are? Bellatrix grinned at her from where she stood nearby. I was starting to think you wouldn't show up. How dare you even suggest it? Hermione found the interaction refreshing. It cleared away any doubt she had. So, we're going to patrol together, right? She asked. Oh, I'm not letting you get away. Bellatrix motioned towards the door. After you. I wasn't thinking of escaping, Hermione chuckled as they made their way towards the dungeons. In fact, I wanted to talk to you about something. Is it about your Christmas present? No, I do not agree with the house elf beheading tradition. No, I will not do it to Tilly. It's not that. Hermione shook her head. It's about, well, she felt the temperature drop noticeably, and the change had nothing to do with them heading towards the dungeons. Are you sure you want to have that conversation? Bellatrix asked, the joyful note in her tone gone. It's necessary when we keep having these great times, and then I still dream of it, Hermione admitted. She stole a glance at Bellatrix and noticed the woman's eyes were fixed straight ahead, emotionless. There is no medicine for that, I'm afraid. I know, but I have to ask. Go on. Do you still think about it? This time Bellatrix did look at her, and their eyes met. Would you believe me if I said I'm having nightmares too? Despite their communication in the past few months, Hermione felt like this was the first time she saw real emotion in Bellatrix's eyes. Yes, she breathed, not wanting to end the moment. They had come to a halt in front of the potions classroom and were staring at each other, as if seeing one another for the first time. It's hell, Bellatrix whispered. It was hell from that first night right after. What Voldemort did to us after letting you and Potter escape. It was nothing compared to what I felt. And you still feel it? It hurts. It's like an open wound. Every time we speak, I feel like I'm rubbing salt in it. You haven't mentioned that, Hermione mused. Complain for getting what I deserve? Even now, I'm saying more than you are. Bellatrix closed her eyes for a moment, as though steeling herself. I should be hearing you out. Scream, Hermione. Punch if you'd like, as long as it makes you feel better. You deserve to get rid of your nightmares. Hermione shook her head with a sad smile. I used to think I want that, she said. That I want you in front of me, ready to take whatever I could throw at you. I wanted to yell at you and send curses your way until you felt even a fraction of my pain. But that was never going to make me feel better. Hermione took a risk and stepped forward. Bellatrix stood her ground. I just need to know, you said you would do it all again if you had to. She braced herself. Would you? Do it all again? I don't know, Bellatrix whispered, her voice breaking. All of a sudden, Hermione felt way too hot in the cold dungeon. The torches lining the walls emanated too much light. Her head was spinning. Her eyes were playing tricks on her too. Suddenly, all she saw was Bellatrix's face in front of her. Pale skin, those high cheekbones, elegantly styled eyebrows, long eyelashes making those heavy lids fall even further over the eyes. The black eyes, so emotionless mere seconds ago, were now overly expressive, a myriad of emotions passing through, fleeting. The gentle curve of a nose, blood-red lips, slightly parted to reveal pristine white teeth. Healthy. A tongue darted out to moisten the lips. Before any other thought could emerge in her brain, Hermione decided she should be the one doing that. And she did, in a moment of pure madness. She surged forward and captured those blood-red lips. The kiss was immediately reciprocated, as if it had been a long time coming. Hermione marveled at how easily Bellatrix gave in, letting Hermione lead them until they reached the wall. Bellatrix hissed as she was pushed against it, which gave Hermione just enough time to slip her tongue inside the witch's mouth. The kiss deepened, and as Hermione grabbed Bellatrix's shoulders so the woman couldn't push her away, Bellatrix placed her hands on the back of Hermione's head and pulled her impossibly closer. Hermione pulled away only when she felt her lungs burn with the need for oxygen. The gasp that escaped Bellatrix's lips was all the prompt she needed, however, and she latched onto the older woman's neck, eliciting more of those breathy sounds. Sinful. Hermione bit into the soft flesh and heard a thud as Bellatrix slammed her head back against the stone wall. Smiling to herself, Hermione added her hands, trailing them up and down Bellatrix's body until they settled on her breasts and squeezed lightly over the corset. She didn't pause to think. Her body moved on its own accord. Apparently, so did Bellatrix's as the woman lifted her leg voluntarily, so Hermione could reach underneath the hem of her dress. As her hand sneaked up Bellatrix's thigh, she felt how hot the skin there was. She felt lace and heard Bellatrix moan as she pushed it aside. Hermione angled her wrist and entered her swiftly with 2 fingers, kissing her to swallow the sound she was making. Bellatrix recovered quickly from the surprise if the hand, fumbling with the front of Hermione's robes, was any indication. Hermione moaned into their kiss, too, as Bellatrix gave up and stroked her from the outside. She was doing wicked things with those long fingers, and Hermione found herself wishing their places were reversed, just for a moment. Then Bellatrix ended their kiss and licked away to Hermione's ear, biting it sharply before smoothing over the flesh with her tongue. Hermione was grateful for their position now, and she braced herself against the wall with one hand, picking up the pace with the other as Bellatrix sucked on her pulse point and used her hands to do things Hermione hadn't even thought were possible with all her clothes still on. She felt it coming, forming low in her stomach, before releasing the tension in waves, which Bellatrix's skilled hands guided her through. Hermione fought to stay upright until she felt Bellatrix shuddering and contracting around her fingers. For a moment they stood still, breathing heavily and supporting each other's weight so that they didn't fall down to the ground. Hermione's eyes were closed because she knew that when she dared to open them her brain would catch up with what had happened. And it did. Before any of them broke the silence, the realization hit Hermione like a train. She pulled her hand away from Bellatrix as if burned. The witch hissed at the sudden loss of contact, and they both opened their eyes. As they locked gazes, Hermione's flight mode kicked in. She pushed herself off the wall and ran away from that corridor, from the dungeons, from this part of the castle as a whole, without looking back. Chapter and notes. I haven't written smut that many times, let alone posted it, so any and all positive or negative feedback is welcome. I hope you liked it in any case. Chapter 23. Chapter notes. Some more Black Sisters interaction, because I'll use any excuse to write one. Promise for more coming soon. Enjoy. Bellatrix was pacing around the dining room of their childhood home. Not so much a home, but this was the least of her worries right now. Her sisters sat at the table, a cup of tea in front of each one, and stared at her in annoyance, waiting for some grand revelation or whatever had requested their presence here in the first place. You know, we have things to do, Andromeda huffed. Perhaps send an owl when you are finished pacing and ready to talk. Narcissa quipped snidely. I slept with someone. Bellatrix turned to them with a deadpan expression on her face. No words were exchanged for a moment, during which Narcissa pinched the bridge of her nose and Andromeda guffawed. I know we are reconciling, being there for each other and whatnot, Andromeda said after regaining composure. But if you call us over here every time that happened, we might as well come back to live here. Granger, Bellatrix said pointedly. I slept with Granger. This time, Andromeda was lost for words. Narcissa, however, seemed to have a lot to say. Granger? As in Hermione Granger? The girl who is my son's age, and with whom you can't exchange two sentences without bickering. You're not helping. I don't think you can be helped, Narcissa snapped. Sleeping with Granger. Where was your common sense? Flew out the window the moment the girl kissed her, I would suppose. Andromeda grinned. Bellatrix groaned. Come on, Andromeda. I had hopes for you at least. You're the one who deals with emotions and all that dung. Emotions? You and Granger have emotions besides hate and lust. Andromeda was mocking her. Narcissa was failing to hide her grin, and Bellatrix wanted the ground to swallow her whole. No! I stopped laughing. Her sisters weren't even hiding it anymore. Bellatrix began circling the table again, waiting for them to settle down, even though she knew that when they settled down they would have questions. And she herself had questions. She didn't know what had happened last night, and she didn't know what would happen from this point on. All she knew was she had liked having Hermione around to talk to, and she had liked having Hermione. No, she told herself before she could go there. The girl was her nephew's age, and she had probably acted out of spite. She did admit to having wanted Bellatrix at her mercy. What did Hermione say? Andromeda interrupted her thoughts. Nothing, Bellatrix answered simply, as it had been simple as that. She left right after.